Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek. On today's episode, I'm going to be taking a look at a long-running franchise, one that probably had a lot more life in it than most people expected, and that franchise is Jurassic Park, a franchise that has gone on to reinvent itself as Jurassic World, and is now, has recently celebrated its 30th anniversary, and is now talking about adding a new film to the saga in the future. This is basically going to be my groundwork, looking at the first 6 films for any future discussions surrounding the spin-off media and other future films. So let's go back and look at the time when Jurassic Park ruled the cinema. Right, so Jurassic Park, or Jurassic World, but we'll start with Jurassic Park. The franchise started with a novel by Michael Crichton. Now, I read the novel years ago. I read it in the lead up to the film for the first time, or at least tried to. I was only about 7 at the time. And so I tried to sort of read it then. I already had quite an advanced reading age, but some of the concepts in this were blowing my mind. And so it was quite hard to follow. I came back to it after watching the film, and after the film scared the pants off of me. Watching that in the big screen, I loved Dinosaurs, but that was a traumatic film. Parts of that were terrifying, just on the big screen, how loud it is when you're that young, and parts of it are quite fearsome. I then went back and read the book afterwards. The book is worse. The book is a straight up horror in places. And Michael Crichton is a big name in science fiction and sort of techno thriller. He worked on the Andromeda Strain is one of his. Sphere, which I've also read and absolutely love, is another one of his books that came out a few years before Jurassic Park. The Terminal Man as well. He's written some very good novels. Jurassic Park is probably his most famous work outside of ER. He was the creator of the television series because he'd also worked as he worked in he had an MD. He chose not to practice medicine and focus on his writing, but he studied medicine. He worked in an ER doing his residency and working in that industry. And so obviously that had led to him to create ER as well. And ER was a great show as well that I also quite love, but not the subject of today's topic. The novel for Jurassic Park is intense, is the best way to put it. Like I said, it starts as it's very, very horror focused. I'm probably going to do a reread and probably a review of Jurassic Park. It's probably the book I've read the most in my life. But saying that, I still haven't sat and read it for a good number of years now. But, large parts of it are very strongly etched into my memory. I've read it that many times. And it's a lot grander in scope than the film. The film is incredible. And, it was actually, the film started development in 1991. The book only released in 1990. And it became a passion project of Steven Spielberg, who desperately wanted to make this film. In fact, Universal and Amblin bought the rights to the novel before it was even published. this was one that everyone expected to be good. Michael Crichton had kind of a pedigree to his work at this point. People sort of knew what to expect from him, knew the quality of the work that he'd be producing. And it's Jurassic Park, it's dinosaurs, it's the idea of a scientist, a corporation using genetic technology to bring dinosaurs back to life in the modern day, you know, with the goal of, turning them into a theme park attraction. And then the ways that that can go wrong. In fact, there's a lot of similarities with a previous Michael Crichton work, which is Westworld. In fact, you know, Michael Crichton wrote the script for Westworld, and I watched Westworld several years later. I was a teenager when I watched Westworld, but by that point, I was very, very familiar with Jurassic Park, the novel, and it's very surprising just how many similar beats are in Jurassic Park from the Westworld movie. Um, some of the ideas of the chase, the idea of how things go wrong, how things just keep escalating as they go wrong. Again, Westworld is probably one I'm going to come back to and do a sort of full review on in due course, because it had the HBO series as well, which it spun off. Which spun off from it. It also had a series and a sequel and a television series in the 70s and 80s as well. So it's already a franchise of its own. So because of that, it's something I probably will check out at some point. But the film itself is very good. But yeah, unlike the androids of Westworld that sort of run amok, these are dinosaurs, these are animals, these are in a lot of cases hunters and predators and things that should not be in our world. And Crichton in the novel really kind of explores that, and explores it through the lens of chaos theory, using chaos theorist Ian Malcolm, as well as through the lens of some children, through the lens of a paleontologist. It combined a lot of things that Crichton himself was clearly quite passionate about. He was clearly very invested in paleontology. There's a lot of cutting edge at the time paleontology in the first Jurassic Park novel, and some of that then continues into the sequel, The Lost World. So much chaos theory, like discussions of chaos models and unpredictability and things like that, sometimes done with some very impressive graphics in the book. Like there's fractal patterns and things like that dotted throughout the novel. There's also large computer tables and printouts throughout the novel. And like I said, the novel itself is very good. There's a lot of things that are only kind of touched on in the main film that are given, full subplots in the novel. So, like I said, I will probably go through the novel itself at some point. But I mainly want to discuss the film here. And, like I said, this was a film that was in a long time development. It was, already looking to be made before the first film even before the novel even released. And it's a film that went on to kind of revolutionize a lot of movie making. Like, it was one of the first flagship films with computer generated creatures in, so it was a landmark for computer generated imagery, if nothing else. It's a film that uses not really any big action stars, although there are a couple of actors who do have that pedigree in the film. But for the most part, it's a lot of character actors playing these very rich, very developed characters and going up against dinosaurs, involving cutting edge animatronics, cutting edge visual effects, and everything just feels real. You know, there are issues with it. There are flaws in the storytelling. There's some pacing problems. There's a lot of continuity errors. Like at one point, it was the film with the most continuity errors in like ever. You know, it became one of the early games on the internet was spotting, you know, Jurassic Park discussion of the continuity errors in Jurassic Park is where I first learned about continuity errors being a thing and people sort of spotting them as like a game. And obviously that's something that's gone on to become a huge part of internet discourse. You know, you get things like cinema sins, for example. One of their big things is spotting out continuity errors. But I don't think that is a detriment to the movie. I think for the most part, the movie kind of escapes it. Continuity errors are always a thing. You compile a film from lots of different camera angles, different takes. There's always a risk of continuity errors, and obviously this was a large production, so there's a few. And it's fine. It is what it is. But yeah, this film series is good, and it's been very much maligned. I don't think any film has ever truly kind of captured the magic of that first one. Some have come close, and some have done some very, very different things, but there is something special about the first Jurassic Park film that I don't think the others managed to really recapture, despite their best efforts. And the more modern films, the Jurassic World films, I mean, Jurassic World itself was a huge success, but the sequels that followed were again very maligned, as was Jurassic 3, and The Lost World seems incredibly divisive. It's very different to the novel that it's based on. And so as a result, it's a very, very divisive movie. Personally, I'm going to go with a controversial opinion here. I don't think there are any bad, like outright bad Jurassic Park films. Like in the same way that I don't think there are any outright bad Marvel Cinematic Universe films. There are some that are objectively worse. There are some that are poorer. There are some that have huge faults. But I don't think any of them are objectionably bad. They are, for the most part, competently well-made blockbuster popcorn films. You turn up to a Jurassic Park film expecting to see dinosaurs realized with incredible effects. You expect to see a cast of characters, some of which will end up dead by the end of the movie, being eaten by dinosaurs. And for the most part, you get that. So when a film is delivering what you expect it to do, I don't think it can ever really be called bad. The films I would call bad are the films that I think completely mishandle what they are trying to do. Something like Batman v Superman is a bad movie because what it is trying to do is establish a cinematic universe and lay all this groundwork for the future. And for a lot of what it does, I think it fails quite a lot in trying to be this build up, because it ends up with this end product that I don't think anyone was really invested in, except for some real diehard fans who just seem to latch onto it because it wasn't Marvel. Jurassic Park, I don't think fails at anything it really tries to do. in terms of the core premise. Each of the sequels is there to give us more Jurassic Park, to more dinosaurs, more people, more impressive action sequences, or just more action sequences in general. There are missteps along the way, and I'm probably going to cover all those as I go through the 6 films. But yeah, spoiler up front, I don't think any of them are outright bad. Muddled, flawed, but bad, no. I'm also going to say that Jurassic Park is a franchise that I really like. It's a franchise my family really likes. Like I said, I'd count this novel as probably one of my favorite novels. I'd count the films as, a film series that I generally quite like. And knowing that it has all this expanded media and is continuing to have expanded media, it's probably one that I'm going to come back to in the future. This is a franchise in the same way as something like, maybe not to the same extent, but in the same way as something like Star Wars. It started with, it started with a novel, then went into films, but, started with a film. It's had a spin-off TV series. It's had plans for other spin-off series. It's had toy lines that were built, and some were even abandoned before the shows that they were meant to inspire. It's had so many video games, and there's more stuff coming. We're going to get another film. We've got the Jurassic Park Survivor game, which has been announced, and is supposedly going to be in canon in the same way that the Telltale game was. There's the Camp Cretaceous TV series, which recently wrapped after 5 seasons, and by all accounts is pretty good and does actually kind of tie into the lore and story being told in the Jurassic World movies, as well as kind of answering some of the lingering plot elements. There's an online ARG that answered a lot of questions that led to websites like the Dinosaur Protection Group and things like that. And so much of this has been covered by other YouTubers, other content creators, way more in depth than I planned to. The films are kind of the tip of the iceberg. Comic books as well. Oh god, so many comic books over the years under numerous different publishers. So I'm probably going to do an episode. Definitely going to be doing an episode on the books. I'm probably going to do an episode just on Camp Cretaceous. So think of this episode as kind of laying the groundwork for any kind of future discussion about this series, because essentially that's what it's doing, as well as exploring these 6 films. So with that said, let's get into a discussion about the first Jurassic Park movie. The movie itself, some bits about its development, and yeah, let's discuss how this film became how this series became the sensation it did. So, the first Jurassic Park film. The first film is an exploration of what would happen if someone cloned dinosaurs and brought them back in the modern day. And the character responsible for this is an industrialist named John Hammond. Now, in the novel, John Hammond is very, very much a villain. And very little of that remains in the actual final movie. There's pretty much his exchange with Nedry, and that's it. That really shows just how much of a complete dick he is in the book. But in the film, he's played by Richard Attenborough, who was obviously a lovely man. And, the dude went on to play Santa and is generally considered one of the best versions of Santa in cinema, in his portrayal of Kris Kringle in Miracle on 34th Street. Like, people love that movie, quite rightly so. So, you know, having someone as charismatic and jovial as Richard Hammond playing Richard Attenborough playing John Hammond mean that Hammond is a very, very different character in the film. So yeah, Hammond runs this engineering company called InGen. And InGen are a genetics engineering company, and they have created dinosaurs. They have brought dinosaurs back to life using DNA taken from fossilized mosquitoes. InGen, it's revealed throughout the movie, they own amber mines, they own dig sites, like paleontological dig sites, but they also own an island off the coast of Costa Rica, fictional Isla Nublar. And Isla Nublar is where they are building a destination resort park for these creatures, which is called Jurassic Park. And after an accident at the park, which we get the opening sequence where one of the handlers is killed by a velociraptor, which we don't get to see in that first scene, which I do like. We get a hint of it. We see elements of the puppet, we see the eyes, but we don't see the full creature. And I think the fact that we don't see the raptors until as late in the movie as we do really helps them. The raptors are by far the most fearsome creatures in Jurassic Park. Like, the depiction of the raptors in this, it's problematic from a paleontological standpoint, because it's not accurate at all. But it is very, very, very cool, and probably one of the most iconic things about this franchise. In terms of leaving a long-lasting legacy into pop culture. Like, people think of raptors, they think of the raptors from Jurassic Park. T-Rex, you could think of a variety of different T-Rexes, although it's likely you would also still think of Jurassic Park. So yeah, a handler's been killed in an accident, and so the park needs to be investigated. The park isn't due to open yet anyway, so this is all happening before the park is due to open. And so Hammond invites, along with the lawyer who is insisting on being there, the lawyer Gennaro, also invites a paleontologist, Alan Grant, played by Sam Neill, and paleobotanist Ellie Sattler, who is played by Laura Dern, as well as he invites them because he wants them to help as kind of character witnesses for the park and what they're trying to do there. It helps that he's offering to fund Grant's dig site. It helps that, he also kind of has this established relationship, being the owner of their digs, one of the patrons of their dig anyway. Gennaro, meanwhile, decides to bring along Ian Malcolm, who is played by Jeff Goldblum in this. He is absolutely fantastic. He is a chaotician, and the whole idea of chaos theory, it's this it's a foundational idea behind a lot of Crichton's writing in Jurassic Park, and it's downplayed a bit in the movie, but it's very, very prominent in the books. And like I said, I'll probably do that another way when I review the books. But yeah, chaos theory states that within the apparent randomness of chaotic complex systems, there are underlying patterns, interconnection, feedback loops, repetition, fractals are a big part of the book, and self-organization. So, and it's linked to a lot of things that are known about in popular culture, things like the butterfly effect, how a small change in one state of what seems like a non-linear system can result in large differences in a later state. You can demonstrate things like chaos theory using like the double rod pendulums and how they swing in different directions all the time. It's the whole idea is basically that there is unpredictability that is inevitable, but there's also links within that unpredictability, and you can predict, not really that you can predict the unpredictable, but you can make um theories based on what might happen because you can understand the unpredictability in certain ways. So and they do demonstrate. I think they do a pretty good job of trying to demonstrate it in the film. And this film, by the way, is the first film is very, very faithful to a lot of the book. There are large parts of the novel's dialogue lifted pretty much verbatim and put straight in the movie. And I think it is one of the strengths of this film, is because, from an adaptation standpoint, a lot of the elements in the film are very, very different to the elements in the book. The book, in some aspects, is a lot grander, and like I said, it's also much different in tone. It feels a lot more like a horror film in certain aspects. If it was to be a straight adaptation, there's parts of it that are straight up horror. Um, there's some very, very tense. As much as it's a techno thriller, there are some horrific moments in that novel. Bits of the characters being stalked by the dinosaurs and things like that. So yeah, finding the balance is interesting. And I think for the most part, the film does a very, very good job um, of doing this. The film takes a lot of what's in the novel, and while it downplays a lot of the horror elements, it lifts so much almost verbatim. Like, even some of the subplots are adapted into this in, again, downplayed. They're not explored as thoroughly as they are in the novel, but like the idea of the dinosaurs breeding is an element of the book. And in fact, it's quite a large subplot in the book. The fact that the dinosaurs are breeding, like, it's confirmed. In fact, the chapter where they do this is one of my favorite chapters in the book. And just because of the way it's presented, it's one of the ones that's really stuck with me. But it's kind of lightly touched on. It's the idea that they could breed, and then later on it's revealed that, oh no, actually they are. There are dinosaur eggs. There are egg shells on the island. So the dinosaurs have been breeding. We don't know which dinosaurs, presumably quite small ones based on the size of the eggs. But we only see 7 dinosaur species in the first movie, despite the ones that we see later on in the franchise, suggesting that while there are others that were probably cloned and around on the park, we don't see them in this first movie. In fact, saying that we see 7, we only see one of them, the Parasaurolophus, in a long shot. So technically, we only really feature 6 dinosaurs, 3 carnivores, 3 herbivores, all brought to life with a mixture of computer graphics and animatronics, and I'll probably talk a bit more about the development of those later on. But anyway, they get brought to the island along with Hammond's grandchildren, because obviously his main market for this is kids, and they do a good job of showing his love for his grandchildren in this, and I think that's helped by the actor, by the fact that Richard Attenborough was clearly quite a good actor when it came to interacting with kids. Because, again, in the novel, Hammond does not seem to really engender himself to his grandchildren. And yeah, his grandchildren, Tim and Lex, he sets them and Gennaro, Malcolm, Grant, and Sattler off for a tour of the park. The tour does not go well, and he's watching from the control room. They start by exploring some of the bits of the park, like the hatchery. They meet Dr. Wu, who is the head geneticist responsible for the cloning. Wu is a more major character in the book, but he leaves the island in this, and actually because there's a boat leaving the island heading back to shore. I can't remember if it's ever really explained why in the book. I think it's just a supply ship, and there seems to be loads of members of the park staff going away, which is weird considering you have guests there. There's pretty much Hammond, computer control operator Ray Arnold, played by Samuel L. Jackson, software programmer Dennis Nedry, who is played by Wayne Knight, and Robert Muldoon, who's the ranger, basically. And he's played by, I want to say Gregory Peck. No, Bob Peck, sorry. Gregory Peck's son, isn't it? And yeah, it's... Yeah, it's... What? Is he Gregory Peck's son? I don't know. Never mind. I might be getting two completely different actors confused. I do that sometimes. But yeah, Wong has like a brief cameo, a brief appearance, played by BD Wong, and then he leaves. They meet a doctor, Dr. Harding, on the tour when they encounter a sick Triceratops. Again, another quite large semi-large subplot from the novel, which is kind of trimmed for time. In the novel, it's a Stegosaurus, not a Triceratops, that they treat. I like the fact they changed it to a Triceratops. I think that's a much more iconic dinosaur. Although it does mean, I think, that there's only one Jurassic era creature in this film. Because obviously the dinosaur, the age of the dinosaurs was spread across 3 eras, and it's the Triassic era, the Jurassic era, and the Cretaceous era. And this is a lot of the dinosaurs in this are from the Cretaceous period, but that seems to be where a lot of the more iconic dinosaurs seem to hail from, so I understand why. But yeah, they do the tour. They have to cut the tour short early because the Triceratops is sick. Ellie goes off to help Harding try and diagnose why the Triceratops is ill. It's because it's basically eating berries while swallowing stones. But I don't think that explanation is ever actually mentioned in the film. But like I said, it's a part of the novel. And, the tour is kind of heading back in the middle of a storm. And during that storm, the power goes out. The reason the power goes out is because Dennis Nedry, being ridiculously underpaid for the work he is doing by John Hammond, who keeps insisting that he spared no expense, shall we say? Let's not forget to mention. Dennis Nedry, ridiculously underpaid, has taken a job from a rival company and been paid by someone called Lewis Dodgson to steal the frozen dinosaur embryos. To do this, Nedry deactivates the park's security system so that he can get access to the storage room, steals some of the embryos, puts them into a shaving cream can that's been cleverly designed. But doing that also cuts power to not just the tour vehicles, but also the dinosaur cage fences. And as a result, the dinosaurs are able to escape. There's the attack from the Tyrannosaurus against the 2 cars, during which Malcolm is left injured, Gennaro is eaten, and Grant and the kids are lost in the park. It's very, very cool. Again, Harding disappears. He goes off on the boat. But Ellie's back at the command center with Arnold and Hammond, Arnold, Hammond, and Muldoon trying to sort of get to the bottom of everything and work out what's going on. Harding, again, major character in the book, not really a part of this at all. Just another glorified cameo, unfortunately. Nedry, however, in trying to escape, doesn't make it to the boat. He ends up being killed by the Dilophosaurus, which spits venom in this. And I like that inclusion because it's one of those things that is hard to identify from the paleontological record, because something like a venom gland, there's no bones in a venom gland, so you wouldn't know which animals could spit venom. And it's got this cartilaginous frill that kind of rattles as well. And again, cartilage doesn't leave fossils. So it's sort of taking liberties with the animals, but in a way that makes them more interesting. And, you know, somewhat fascinated by dinosaurs as a child, I do like that. The Dilophosaurus, I think, yeah, like I said, that's the only real Jurassic animal in this. But yeah, it kills Nedry. The shaving cream can that he has gets dropped and lost on the island, covered in mud from the storm. And yeah, they what follows is the dinosaurs start running amok in the park. The T-Rex kind of chases Sattler and Muldoon when they rescue Malcolm. Grant, Tim, and Lex are trying to make their way back to the central buildings. Along the way, they discover the broken shells of dinosaur eggs, which Grant works out means that the dinosaurs are breeding, because some species of frogs can change sex. And they used amphibian DNA to fill the gaps in the dinosaur gene sequence. So some of the dinosaurs are able to change sex and then able to breed. You know, it's very clever. You know, they encounter a stampede and run from the T-Rex and things like that. It's quite exciting. Again, there's a lot more of it in the novel than there is in this, but what is here is amazing and visually stunning, looks incredible. There's some really great moments, like some lovely moments with the dinosaurs, as much as you get some of the sheer terror with the actual dinosaurs themselves, like the T-Rex chasing them, and the attack on the cars. The first attack on the cars is very intense. And, you know, a lot of it is done with this big animatronic T-Rex that is life-size, and it's really, like, treading on the car and ripping bits apart. And it's very, very impressive, very believable. But yeah, there's a lot of the early wonder, like when they first arrive on the park and they see their first dinosaur, and it's this Brachiosaurus, and the camera just pans up and up and up and shows us this incredible creature, like realized in full computer imagery for the first time. It's impressive. And then later on we go back to the Brachiosaurus, and you know, the Lex, Tim, and Grant see one when they're hiding in the trees, you know, because it comes up to eat the leaves near them, and they see the dinosaurs. And yeah, it's just a nice kind of sweet moment after everything that they've just gone through. So yeah, it's stunning to watch. You know, this film still really, really holds up. But then, of course, because Arnold can't fix Jurassic Park and Nedry is gone, the only way they can bring things back is to do a complete reset of the system, shut down the entire energy grid and power everything back on. They do it, but not everything comes back on straight away. Arnold has to go to a maintenance shed in an emergency bunker. He has to go to a maintenance shed to reboot everything. He fails to return, and Sattler and Muldoon go to investigate. Along the way, they find that the shutdown has deactivated all the remaining fences and released the velociraptors. The velociraptors were kept in a separate pen and they were kept in a separate pen because of how violent they were. They used to keep attacking the fences. Like I said, the velociraptors are a big part of this movie. Grant himself is actually like studying them. That's, we first see him unearthing a raptor when we're first introduced to him, and he talks about how vicious of predators they were, how intelligent they probably were, the fact that they would run and hunt in packs, and all these leading theories at the time. And then, of course, when he meets Muldoon for the first time, Muldoon corroborates a lot of those theories and says, yeah, they're fast, they're lethal, they are dangerous. Muldoon actually, hates them. He's like, they should all be destroyed. And we reveal that there were, at one point, 8 of them. But then the big one, the one that killed the handler at the start of the movie, when she was put into the pen with the others, she killed all but 2 of them. There's now only 3 raptors left. And so, yeah, the fact that they are now released, they've been safe the entire time. Nedry disabled every other fence but didn't need to disable the raptor fences, so he didn't. He just needed to disable the fences so that he could get through the security gates, through the fences, to get to the boat. But he didn't need to disable the raptors because they're off the main grid. The power reset, though, that disabled them. The raptors have escaped. And we then get, the often memed clever girl scene where Muldoon is hunted and killed in exactly the same way that Alan described earlier on to a small child, and catches them in the exact way that Grant described, but not a way that Muldoon was expecting. And so, yeah, Muldoon dies. Sattler manages to get the power back on, though. And she gets the power back on just as Grant, Tim, and Lex are going over an electric fence. So Tim ends up electrocuted. They get back to the visitor center, and Grant goes off to try and find Ellie, leaving Tim and Lex inside. He doesn't know that the raptors are free. He thinks they're safe. The raptors break in, pursue the kids into a kitchen. Very, very tense scene of the raptors in the kitchen. It's absolutely incredible, to watch back. And there's some bits that, some of the CGI maybe looks a little bit rough, but the puppet work is so good. And they manage to trap one in a freezer. They manage to escape. They go out. They find Grant and Sattler, who have both arrived back. Sattler has obviously found Arnold's severed arm and got attacked by a raptor herself inside the bunker that she thinks she's trapped there. She even says, it's trapped unless they can open doors. And then we see the raptor opening the door into the kitchen to follow Lex and Tim. Very, very clever. And yeah, they managed to. They're running through the visitor center, away from the raptors. Lex, they managed to get into the computer room. Lex manages to reboot everything because it turns out she's a bit of a hacker. In the book, it's Tim that does it, not Lex, because their ages are reversed. So I quite like in this that it was Lex, because otherwise she's a bit of a punching bag through most of the story. And yeah, they restore the power. They call Hammond in the bunker where he is with Malcolm, and Hammond calls for help. But then at that point, they get cornered by the remaining raptors. They end up stuck and suspended from the ceiling on these hanging skeletons that were there, which then get trashed when the raptors land on them. They all collapse to the floor. The raptors are closing in on them. And then suddenly Ninja T-Rex comes in, kills the 2 raptors. There's a fight between the raptor, the last big raptor, and the T-Rex. And Hammond arrives in a Jeep with Malcolm. They all get in it. They all rush to the helicopter. They fly off the island. Grant decides in a joking sort of way not to endorse the park, and Hammond says, me neither. And then they all fly off, and you get the quite nice ending where Grant, having got over his issues with children due to the time that he spent with Tim and Lex, is kind of with them on the helicopter, and he looks out the window, and we see the real life birds flying over the ocean. I believe it's pelicans. And Grant said in the first, earlier on in the movie, how the raptors indicated the early evolution of dinosaurs into birds. And it's quite nice and quite peaceful, the ending after everything, and helped by the phenomenal John Williams score. It's a great movie. Like, this movie is good. It's not short. It's 127 minutes long, so it's about 2 hours, which, while not uncommon nowadays, was a bit more unheard of for the time, especially for a family film like this. This is a long film. It's a big, expensive film. The budget of this was like $63 million, which doesn't sound like much nowadays, but 1993, that was a heckin' chunk of change. And then the marketing budget was like double that, like $65 million. This movie did really, really well. Like, really, really well. It went on to make hundreds of millions off the back of this. It was a huge success. And, it was revolutionary. The rights themselves for the movie cost like 1.5 million before the book was even out. And they even hired Crichton to help write the script for another $500,000. Like, he wrote it with David Coop. And they worked together and wrote the movie, and then it was directed by Spielberg as well. So it's a great film, and it looks amazing as well. Like, it's actually presented in, I think it's 1 to, what's the aspect ratio for it? I did see it. I'm gonna have to Google it now. Jurassic Park aspect ratio. I think it's, because it's not a full widescreen, it's like an actual full screen. I thought it was 1.85 to 1, which means you have 24% more vertical landscape in each frame of the film. So essentially, it's the equivalent nowadays of like an IMAX movie in terms of how much it fills the frame. Although not quite. IMAX is a bit more, I think, is it IMAX the 4:3 that Zack Snyder used for Justice League? So it's not quite the IMAX one, but it's bigger. It is what I'm saying. It fills the frame. It's not a traditional widescreen letterbox, and it means that everything in this film holds up because everything looks so big and so real, and the scale is so impressive, and it means that these dinosaurs look big and terrifying when they're meant to be, or awesome when they're meant to be. And it's incredible. Now, it's important to mention that the film Jurassic Park, while over 2 hours long, only features around 15 minutes of on-screen dinosaurs, approximately 9 minutes of which is animatronics created by Stan Winston Studios, and 6 minutes, while originally planned as stop motion, instead uses pioneering CGI by Industrial Lights and Magic, or then pioneering at least. The CGI was in many cases used as a last resort. They tried to realise the dinosaurs practically as much as possible. However, it is likely that the CGI probably allowed for some sequences that may not have been as impressive in stop motion. Now, that isn't to knock stop motion at all. For example, Nightmare Before Christmas released that same year and looks incredible. But most experience I have personally with stop motion, except for the works of Ray Harryhausen, such as Clash of the Titans, is very stylized or does not go for realism. A good example is the original Beetlejuice, which features some stop motion effects mixed with real actors, but still has a very stylized look to it. In fact, it took ILM doing a CGI test run for Spielberg to actually consider using the CGI dinosaurs at all. And it was a huge investment, most notably in time. Like, compositing the CGI dinosaurs into the live action sequences could take an hour, like, per frame. Rendering the creatures could take like 2 to 4 hours per frame of the film, and for the scenes of the T-Rex in the rain, that number ran up to things like 6 hours per frame. So 24 frames a second, that takes a while. In fact, most of the extensive post-production process, Spielberg was already off filming Schindler's List in Poland and had to have teleconferences 4 times a week with ILM to oversee the progress. In all, it took them nearly a whole year for the CGI to be finished. The biggest dinosaur in the film, in many ways, is the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The Rex was a full-scale animatronic with pretty much every part of the body realised so that it could be used in a variety of shots. It was over 6 metres tall, 12 metres long, and weighed 7.9 metric tonnes. Paleontologist Jack Horner, who was on set and as advisor, said it was the closest he had ever been to a live dinosaur upon seeing it. Most of the scenes in that first sequence as the Rex escapes the paddock and attacks the cars involve the animatronic, with the CGI being used sparingly, helping to reinforce the believability of the creature. However, it was a rather frustrating shoot. The rainwater that they were using kept soaking into the dinosaur's foam rubber skin, thus causing the animatronic to shake and quiver because of the extra weight, meaning that between takes the model had to be dried with chamois. The most famous, the famous water ripples for its footsteps were not CGI, however. That was actually a practical effect, which they achieved using a guitar string. They'd been inspired by Spielberg listening to the bass rhythm of Earth, Wind and Fire in his car. That was where they came up with the idea to do it that way. In fact, all of the Rex's most well-known CGI appearances come later in the film, while the animatronic is confined almost to the sequence with the cars. In fact, the final scene with the T-Rex and the Raptors, which was a late addition to the script by Spielberg, was entirely CGI. One of the most notable of the scenes with the CGI Rex is the Gallimimus chase, with the Gallimimus themselves being exclusively CGI, and a lot of their movements was taken from video footage of the animation team, organised by Phil Tippett, running in the car park in the same ways as the dinosaur, even incorporating one dinosaur that fell while jumping over the log because one of the animators did. The animation for the Gallimimus herd also focused on the movements of the herd as a whole rather than individual animals. The Gallimimus was also the first animal to be digitised in tests by ILM. As a counterpoint to this, the Triceratops is rendered entirely using the animatronic, which was manipulated on set by around 8 puppeteers, allowing for the actors to interact directly with the creature. So, like, for example, that scene of Grant lying on the Triceratops as it's breathing. The first iconic shot of the Brachiosaurus used CGI exclusively, but the largest puppet without hydraulics is used for the head and neck in the treetop scene, without it chewing its food. With it chewing its food to seem docile like a cow. The Raptors were mainly done using puppets and actors in suits, with very few CGI shots. The suits included arms and legs for certain shots, so when the Raptors step into frame, or the arms that reach out and things like that, like for opening the doors, for example. The Dilophosaurus was also a puppet, with all of its features being practical. The practical effects did influence the CGI as well, as Phil Tippett and ILM worked together to create something called the Dinosaur Input Device, which was a robot shaped like a dinosaur skeleton, with sensors that captured poses, which could then be transferred into graphics software at ILM. And so essentially sort of a precursor to like a lot of motion capture that's done nowadays. Tippett himself also created animatronics and storyboards for all of the key action sequences to help the crew realize them in a unified manner. The CGI dinosaurs were also explicitly modeled after the Stan Winston creations where they were available. Obviously, the technology for both practical and CGI effects would increase throughout the sequels, and even when the CGI became more dominant in the sequels, Stan Winston Studios was still providing painted maquettes and sculptures that could then be used by ILM. And it works to create like a real marriage of the two to allow for realism at every level. And I think that's a huge part of why the first Jurassic Park film especially still stands up 30 years later. You know, practical effects are being used for all the close-ups and interactions, and CGI is being used for the fluid creature movement. You know, anything that can't be realized, that can be realized practically, is realized practically. Anything that can't is used as the CGI, and the care and the time goes into that CGI to make it look good. The dinosaur sounds are probably almost as iconic as their visuals, however, and they use like a variety of sources to create these impressive and frankly iconic sound effects now. With heavy remixing and sound manipulation. So, the Brachiosaurus, for example, used whale songs, which got selected to create a sense of wonder. It got enhanced by elements of donkey and penguin sounds. The Gallimimus, while its movements were based on ostriches, the sounds came from horses. The sick Triceratops had its breathing created by sound designer Gary Ridstrom, breathing into a cardboard tube, as well as cow sound effects. The Dilophosaurus used a variety of sounds in its vocalizations, including a swan, a hawk, a howler monkey, and obviously most famously the rattlesnake for the frill. The raptors also used a variety of sources. There's elements like dolphin screams, bellowing walruses, hissing geese, the mating call of an African crane, tortoises mating, and even human rasps to create this really impressive vocal range. And then the noises that the raptors make themselves would be expanded upon and even becomes plot points in some of the later sequels. Jurassic Park 3, for example, really goes into raptor communication. The most iconic noises, though, were those of the T-Rex. That famous roar, which is now something that's been used by many other sources since for a T-Rex, because obviously in public consciousness and public zeitgeist, that's what a T-Rex sounds like. And it was made by combining the squeal of a baby elephant, a tiger's snarl, and a lion's roar with noises from alligators and crocodiles. The breath of the T-Rex was a whale's blowhole, and the grunts it made came from a male koala. The sound of it attacking a Gallimimus was sourced from a dog attacking a rope toy, and the iconic footsteps are actually the sounds of sequoia trees collapsing to the ground after being cut. The final noises sound real, yet at the same time very alien and otherworldly, being believable and unique while not quite sounding like anything we have today. And I think it works so well. It's the everything about the creation of the dinosaurs in that first Jurassic Park movie and how it's influenced things in the sequels is so impressive. You know, it's a documentary. There's been documentaries on the making of Jurassic Park. There was a very famous one, which was presented by the late James Earl Jones, who obviously recently passed away as I'm recording this. So, yeah, it's fantastic to see that the work and the attention that went in, and it shows in the final product. The fact that this film took years to make shows in the final product. So, obviously, with how incredibly successful Jurassic Park had been, thought soon turned to a sequel. And not just for the film, the novel as well. after the publication of the novel in 1990, Michael Crichton was pressured by his fans to write a sequel. There was a lot of demand for more of this, even though the novel ends quite conclusively. Like, you know, the ending of the novel sees the island completely destroyed. Like the Costa Rican military, which by the way isn't a thing in the real world, they like firebomb the entire island while all the characters are being evacuated. So you see them watch as like these dinosaurs are killed in firebombs. So yeah, it's a very definitive ending in the book. And there's a few characters who survive the film that don't survive the book, and vice versa. Um, so yeah, it's a very very different story. But obviously, the film then obviously went on to be hugely successful as well, and Spielberg became interested in making a sequel. And Crichton had actually never written a sequel before. He was quite hesitant to do so. He said a sequel was a very difficult structural problem because, as he said, it has to be the same but different. If it's really the same, then it's the same, and if it's really different, then it's not a sequel. So it's in some funny intermediate territory. And he said he finally got a good idea for the sequel around March 1994. That's when he kind of announced it. And he said, yeah, he's got an idea for the novel story and an idea for a film adaptation. So the two of them would both happen. And yeah, so the sequel novel's pretty good. Crichton chooses to bring back Malcolm as the main central character because, as he said, I could do without all the others, but not Malcolm, as he is the ironic commentator on the action. He keeps telling us why it will go bad, and so I had to have him back again. Now, Malcolm doesn't survive the first novel, so he has to kind of retcon it and explain that, oh, no, Malcolm did survive, and we just didn't think he was going to make it. No, he actually pulled through afterwards. Um, so that's how they kind of get around that. And the novel that came out was called The Lost World. Came out in 1995. I remember getting an early edition of this. Like I bought this when it came out, and it had, well, not long after it came out. Like I saw it in a bookshop, and I was like, I need this book because by that point I'd read Jurassic Park a couple of times, and I was very excited for The Lost World. I did, I was of that age where I didn't know a sequel was coming. I just saw the hardcover um, on the shelf, and I was like, I need it, you know. And I bought it with my own money as well. I bought it with some birthday money that I'd gotten because I was still quite young in 1995. Now, it's called The Lost World, inspired and a homage to the title of Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, but a very different story. Like, there's both an expedition to a location where dinosaurs are, but in this, the dinosaurs were recreated by genetic engineering rather than surviving from antiquity. So it's very different. It becomes the only book sequel that Crichton ever wrote. And it is good. Like, it's a very good, um, yeah, very good novel. It's very different to the film adaptation, though. Like, the film adaptation of The Lost World is very, very different. But there's a lot of interesting parts and interesting plot lines in the novel. And again, I'll probably review the novel at some point, so I'm not going to divulge most of it here. But it does go into a very, very different direction. But not in a bad way. Like I like where it goes. The Lost World Jurassic Park, the film that came out though, was sort of developed off of the back of this. And The production team was assembled in sort of 1995. Spielberg at the time was working with DreamWorks, which he helped found, and hadn't decided if he would direct it, saying, I'd love to direct it, but I just have to see because my life is changing. Now, he was initially signed on to do it, and the filming was due to begin in summer 1996. It was due to release in 1997. They assembled the production team sort of spring 95, just as Crichton was finishing the novel. And Spielberg and David Coop, started developing ideas for the screenplay. The novel was published in September, and by November, Spielberg did sign on and said yes, he was going to do it. And both Spielberg and Crichton agreed to forgo any upfront fees for a share of the back end. And David Coop's deal, he wrote the screenplay for this, was said to be the most lucrative for an adaptation at the time. He had a fee in the region of like $1.5 to $2 million. Joe Johnston offered to direct the film should Spielberg not be able to do it. He wasn't able to direct this one, but he was nominated by Spielberg to direct the sequel, which would come later on, Jurassic Park 3. But I'll get to that when I get to that. Now, the plot for The Lost World focuses on a second island with dinosaurs, but no reference to the canister of dinosaur DNA that Nedry stole. This island is called Site B. And the idea behind Site B, which is set on another island called Isla Sorna, is that if Jurassic Park on Isla Nublar is the show home, then Site B is the factory floor. Site B is the factory where all these dinosaurs are being made. Now, there are some plot holes of a sort because Isla Sorna is quite a large island, as is Isla Nublar. The dinosaurs were not grown on Isla Sorna in quite the same way as they were on Nublar, so they could have had both facilities on the same island quite easily, I would have thought, based on the dimensions for the islands that are given in the novels themselves. But either way, it means we get more dinosaurs. But yeah, David Coop received letters of advice from children who were interested in the film. And one letter, according to Coop, a letter that he actually kept as a sort of reminder, actually said, as long as you have the T-Rex and the Velociraptor, everything else is fine. But whatever you do, don't have a long, boring part at the beginning that has nothing to do with the island. And I think that might have been a reference to the fact that the novel The Lost World does take some time to get back to the island. In fact, I think it takes longer to get to the island in The Lost World than it does in Jurassic Park, which is bizarre because you know what's coming. The book has quite a slow build. The film's build is a lot quicker in terms of how much screen time there is in the movie, and proportionately, like, they get to the island pretty quickly. But I do see the point that was trying to be made, like why kids might be bored with that. Michael Crichton, unfortunately, was not consulted really about the film, unlike where he wrote the first one and helped with the adaptation to create the screenplay. It wasn't until he actually declined to approve merchandising rights that he received a copy of the script even. The film was produced by Kathleen Kennedy, obviously now known for her work at Lucasfilm. And, she was the executive producer of this and producer of Jurassic Park. And she said, in the same way that Michael doesn't see writing as a collaboration, Stephen went off and did his own movie. When Michael turned the book over to Stephen, he knew his work was finished. So by the time Crichton had actually published The Lost World, Spielberg and Co-op had already been working on this film for over a year. And so they decided to combine ideas that they had devised together with those from the novel. And, you know, in Spielberg's own words, he said that the middle portion of the novel was lacking in a story narrative, but that the setup was excellent. And the setup from the novel put Spielberg and his crew on the right road. Now, I do agree the middle section of The Lost World is a bit lacking in direction in some aspects, but whether the film is better than the novel is a completely different discussion. But let's get to the plot for the film itself. The plot for the film, the film, I will actually say, the film does a very good job of adapting some elements from the novels. And when I say the novels, I'm referring also to the first novel, like the opening of this film with the child getting attacked by the compies on Isla Sorna, you know, seems to be connected to a lot of the compy attacks that were happening in the opening of the Jurassic Park novel. But yeah, the film basically starts with Malcolm getting called to see Hammond because of this incident on Isla Sorna. And Hammond has lost control of his company InGen. He is getting old. He's getting quite ill. His nephew, Peter Ludlow, is now in control of the company and has used this incident to take control of the company from Hammond. And Hammond tells Malcolm that InGen had another facility, Site B on Isla Sorna, where their dinosaurs were abandoned during a hurricane. Now, there's a lot of hurricanes in the story of this, because obviously hurricanes do actually affect the production of some of these movies as well. There was whole scenes of a lot of the films that end up being abandoned for multiple reasons. In the first film, it was because a hurricane destroyed a load of sets. In this one, I think it was mainly budgetary. And yeah, I'd be very interested to see some of the alternate ideas had they ever been realized, but unfortunately it doesn't happen. But yeah, Ludlow wants to go to Site B, and because the dinosaurs are still there and they're actually flourishing, and he wants to take the creatures from that island to save InGen from bankruptcy, because InGen is on the verge of bankruptcy. So Hammond asks Ian to join a team to document the dinosaurs in their natural habitat to encourage a policy of non-interference. And one of the people he's hired for this team is Ian's girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, it's not particularly clear, paleontologist Dr. Sarah Harding, who is also in the novel. She's been hired and she's already on Isla Sorna. And, you know, she was too eager. She went straight away. And as a result, Ian wants to go like straight away to rescue her. You know, that's the only reason he wants to go back to the island. So he travels there with Eddie Carr, equipment specialist, and Nick Van Owen, a documentarian. They find Sarah. While they're there, they also discover that Ian's daughter Kelly has stowed away with them in a trailer, which is their like mobile base. And just as they're trying to contact the phone to leave the island so that he can take Kelly away, Ludlow and his team of mercenaries arrive on the island with a team to capture the dinosaurs, led by a big game hunter named Roland Tembo and his assistant RJ Sidhu. There's also Robert Burke, a paleontologist, and who I think is a reference to a very thinly veiled reference to Backer. I've forgotten his first name, but he's a paleontologist called Backer, known for his cowboy hat and flannel. And there's also Dieter Stark, who is Roland's second in command. I will say this film is great for character actors. Like Julianne Moore plays Sarah Harding, Richard Schiff is Eddie Carr, Peter Stormare is Dieter, Pete Postlethwaite is Roland Tembo. it's just a very good cast, and like the cast in the first film was already good as well. And Vince Vaughn as well as Nick Van Owen, although he's not someone I enjoy as much. But yeah, just good character actors. This film, though, goes on to have probably the most severe body count in terms of any film in this series. So many people die in this one because pretty much every one of the mercenaries will end up dead throughout the movie, um, including RJ, Dieter, and by the end of the film, Ludlow himself as well. Yeah, because they capture a whole the mercenary team capture a whole load of dinosaurs. They take a load of them. RJ, he wants not RJ, sorry. Roland wants his fee to be the right to hunt one of the T-Rexes, the male T-Rex specifically. And he finds a T-Rex nest and breaks the leg of the excuse me, of the T-Rex infant. And so yeah, he breaks the leg of the infant T-Rex and leaves it like stranded in the nest waiting for the male Rex to come back. The male Rex doesn't. However, Nick and Sarah let loose all of the caged dinosaurs, which creates a huge ruckus at the mercenary camp, which means Roland and RJ leave the nest to go and help. Nick and Sarah then Nick specifically finds the injured T-Rex baby and takes it back to the trailer, which leads to the two adult Rexes following them to the trailer to destroy it. And the trailer attack is lifted pretty much from the novel, and for very similar reasons. It's very good. It's one of the highlights of the film in terms of dramatically, visually. It's just a very, very good scene. But yeah, now the mercenaries and Malcolm's team, what's left of them, Eddie unfortunately passes away. What's left of them are left stranded on the island together, and they have to team up to get out. Now, the former InGen base is still mostly intact. However, it's in the center of the island, which is where a lot of the predators have set up camp, specifically velociraptors. So the crew then goes there. Along the way, several of them are killed. There's blood of the infant T-Rex on Sarah's jacket, so the T-Rexes are following them to like drive them out of their territory. And this leads to a lot of people dying. Burke gets killed, a lot of other characters get killed, a whole load of mercenaries, including RJ, run into some long grass and get ambushed by velociraptors. Ian, Sarah, Kelly, Nick all manage to reach the InGen base. They manage to radio for an extraction. They fight off some velociraptors. Some of this gets cheesy. Like there's a scene where Kelly kicks one out of a window, which is quite highly derided. And it does kind of make the raptors lose some of their edge. But yeah, they managed to escape the island, and Nick reveals that he was able to steal Roland's ammunition to prevent him from killing the male Rex. However, as they're flying away, they find out that Roland has actually sedated the male T-Rex with tranquilizers instead. And so more and more InGen personnel arrive on the island. They manage to secure the male and the infants. Roland declines Ludlow's job offer at the park in San Diego, which is where he's planning to take the T-Rexes, because of RJ's death and the morality of what Ludlow is planning, and he just leaves, and thus leaves the coolest character in any of the Jurassic Park movies, for my money. Roland Tembo, amazing character, and he survives the movie and never reappears again, which is a shame because I really like him. Obviously, it'd be hard to bring him back in the modern day due to the fact that Pete Postlethwaite is unfortunately no longer with us. But yeah, I really liked this character, and he's just gone. But that's not where the movie ends, because then the boat that the male T-Rex is on crashes into San Diego port. The T-Rex bursts out of the ship. There's corpses everywhere. None of the crew are left alive. It's not really explained how he's been able to kill them all and it still be sealed in the hold. But yeah, this T-Rex then goes on a rampage throughout San Diego. Ian and Sarah go and rescue the infant and bring the infant back to the docks so that they can trap the male T-Rex back in the boat to take it back to Sauna. Yeah, it's cheesy. It is. The finale of this movie is cheesy, and there's nothing like it in the book. But I don't hate it. Like, some of the chaos of like this dinosaur just rampaging throughout downtown San Diego, I'm sorry, some of that is really entertaining. And yeah, it's cheesy and it's funny and it doesn't seem to be serious at all, but I can't deny that some bits of it are quite fun. It is what it is. And Ludlow ends up paying the price. He gets eaten by the baby T-Rex. In fact, the adult sort of leads the infant to kill Ludlow and then kind of looks on approvingly at like his first kill, which I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, they get sent back to the island, and Hammond gives a speech on the news about how he wants the dinosaurs to be left alone, to be protected, and so Site B ends up becoming this quarantined area, the quarantined by the US and Costa Rican governments. And it's an interesting idea. It's not a straightforward adaptation of the novel. There's some very different stuff. A lot of these characters aren't in the novel, and the ones that have been lifted from the novel are very different. Like Eddie Carr is a very different character to the Eddie Carr in the book, for example. Sarah's a lot more similar, but again, there's still some distinct differences there. But yeah, it's a decent enough film. The film went on to be, successful. It had mixed reviews. It wasn't as glowing as the first movie. The CGI effects, the animatronic effects are incredible. There's a lot more CGI in this one. And it looks amazing. But also, the scene of the mercenary team going through this game trail of dinosaurs, and there's bits where the motorcycles are ducking through their legs and everything, and it's very impressive stuff. But yeah, the story, not as good. Roger Ebert, for example, gave the first film 3 stars, which I think is quite light for Roger Ebert. He should have given that more. But he gave The Lost World 2. And I've got to admit, the Lost World film, I like it. I don't think it's my favourite of the franchise. It might possibly be my least favourite because it's still quite long. Like, it's not a short movie. And it's 129 minutes, so still over 2 hours, which means there are bits that are just not very tight. Whereas the previous film is long, but it's very good. It builds the intrigue really well, and the follow-ups tend to be a lot tighter in terms of what they're actually putting in and the action that's on screen, as I'll get to in a minute. But it's not bad. I didn't enjoy the book much either. I think, well, no, it's not that I didn't enjoy the book. There are faults in the book. It's not as good as the first one. Still good, but not as good as the first one. And there is some good stuff. There's some very good character development in this. Like Malcolm anchors this film, and he's really good in it. Like I really quite like Malcolm in this. He's kind of sidelined for a lot of the first film, and he's so good. Like Jeff Goldblum does a brilliant job of portraying him, and in this he's front and center, and he gets scenes where he gets to verbally spar with several of these characters and does it really well. And also it's like the dinosaurs as well. They're really working to kind of show the dinosaurs, like showing these T-Rexes as a family unit, is trying to develop them and focus more on them. And a lot of it is coming from paleontology, like actual paleontology theories at the time, just as was happening in the books. It's not bad. Spielberg himself, though, did say that during production he became disenchanted with the film. The quote was, "I beat myself up, growing more and more impatient with myself. It made me wistful about doing a talking picture, because sometimes I got the feeling that I was just making this big, silent, raw movie. And I found myself saying, is that all there is? It's not enough for me." And he also said he regretted that the characters were aware that they were going to an island of dinosaurs, unlike the previous film. And he later said that he knows a major reason why his sequels tend not to live up to the quality of his originals. He says, "My sequels aren't as good as my originals because I go into every sequel I've made and I'm too confident. This movie made $1 gazillion, which justifies the sequel. So I come in like it's going to be a slam dunk, and I wind up making an inferior movie to the one before." And he said with that, he was specifically talking about The Lost World and Jurassic Park. Now, some critics have described it in later years as probably the worst thing that Spielberg has ever made. Spielberg is generally known as a very good director. He has a lot of hits in his resume. And this is inferior to the predecessor. Like, Jurassic Park is just visually and narratively so much more satisfying than The Lost World is. Lost World is good, but the aspect ratio is different, the way it's shot, the way it's filmed, the way it's staged, there's a lot of differences. But there are good things in here, and I think the through line of the story is a lot better than the novel, and it works at being, it works at doing what it says on the tin. We get dinosaurs eating people. We get people on an island full of dinosaurs. It works quite well at what it does. I don't think it's a bad film by any metric. But yeah, I don't think it's as good as the first one. And I think the first film was such a sensation that it's hard for anything to be as good as the first film. Now, Jurassic Park 3 would be the first installment in the franchise not to be directed by Steven Spielberg, and also not to be based on any prior novel by Michael Crichton. There are characters and occasionally some concepts and ideas that Crichton created in the books that are present in this. Most notably, Sam Neill and Laura Dern reprise their roles as Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler. However, this is essentially a completely new story, completely new idea set on the Site B island. And it's directed by Joe Johnston. The original draft of the script was written by Peter Buckman and was quite different to what what actually happened. It was originally going to be called Jurassic Park Extinction, and but then that was kind of decided against, because it was like, well, are we ending the franchise here, or things like that? And eventually it was shortened to just Jurassic Park 3, which no one was really happy with, including Joe Johnston himself. Now, some elements of the original draft were a lot more complex and a lot more elaborate than what would actually be filmed. Jurassic Park 3 was obviously greenlit off the back of the financial success of The Lost World. Lost World still made a lot of money. It was still successful. Didn't make anywhere near the amount that the first film made, but it was still successful. It proved there was still life in this franchise, that this franchise had legs. And, Universal was desperate to capitalize on that. So, the third film was announced in like June 1998, like a year after Lost World had been released. And originally it was planned for sort of mid 2000s, eventually got pushed back to July 2001. David Coop did help come in with a story idea, which actually led to the original draft being rejected and then rewritten. And yeah, the production of this one is a mess. Like, the production of The Lost World was plagued with problems, but they pale in comparison to the problems that this one had, to the point that there was not even a final draft of the script completed during production, which Joe Johnston almost quit over. He said he actually considered quitting over this. And there's also the new dinosaur antagonist, which was quite controversial as well, which was the Spinosaurus, replacing the Tyrannosaurus as like the main dinosaur antagonist. Obviously, the Velociraptors are still there and they're still a very prominent threat, but the Spinosaurus is definitely the main antagonist of this film, to the point that the logo for this film features the Spinosaurus skeleton rather than the T-Rex one. So, yeah. It was filmed over 5 months, beginning in Hawaii before moving to California, and basically features a boy getting stranded on Isla Sorna while parasailing near it. And, the boat he's attached to enters this thick fog and the crew is killed, wiped out. We don't know what kills them. That's never revealed, but they're just like killed and wiped out. So that means that Ben, his mother's boyfriend, and Eric, the boy, sort of detach from the boat before it crashes into the rocks and sort of sail onto the island. That's the prologue. The main film picks up like 8 weeks later. Alan Grant is desperately trying to secure funding for his latest round of Velociraptor research. He's, doing press events and community events and educational events where he's speaking about dinosaurs and about his theories, and obviously is constantly being questioned about the events of Jurassic Park, which he refuses to answer. He just rebuffs any obsession that the public have with it. He's saying, they're not dinosaurs, they're not, what Hammond and his people created were not dinosaurs. They were something else. And, people are saying, well, would you ever go to Isla Sorna? He says, nothing you could do could get me to go to that island. And of course, from that point, what's going to happen. So, and his research is, again, influenced by a lot of paleontological research at the time. The idea that the velociraptors, well, raptors in general, but obviously specified by the velociraptors in this film, were intellectually and socially advanced, to the point of forming packs, being able to communicate, things like that. They even have like an early 3D printer where it 3D prints a resonance chamber from inside a skull of a raptor, and is able to kind of blow into it to make noises very similar to the Velociraptor. It's actually his assistant Billy who does it, and the look of horror on Grant's face when Billy is able to perfectly replicate, without being aware of, one of the raptor's noises. So yeah, it's quite good. Like there's elements of this that I don't hate. Like Sam Neill, his performance as Grant, I was one of the highlights from the first film for me, and Grant in this is, he's great. I can see why people would like this. But yeah, Grant and Billy get dragged along to the island. They get offered an aerial tour. They get asked to come along to an aerial tour by this seemingly wealthy couple, Paul and Amanda Kirby, who are played by William H. Macy and Tia Leone. Both very good in the roles, both very good character actors, quite fun in this. Tia Leone does not do much more than scream a lot of the time, which is a shame because she's better than that. But William H. Macy as Paul Kirby anchors everything quite well. He's a very believable kind of everyman who's just in over his head and trying to do the right thing, but not always succeeding. But I quite like William H. Macy as a character actor anyway. I think he's quite charming as an actor. So, him in this role, I like him. I think he does a good job. And yeah, Grant reluctantly agrees because the Kirbys seem wealthy and they're offering to fund his dig and his research and things like that. And while they're flying over, Grant learns that the Kirbys intend to land on the island. He doesn't know why. He protests and gets knocked unconscious by one of their mercenaries who they've brought along with them. And he wakes to find that they've landed on the island at like a small runway, and they try to board the plane and escape because a large theropod attacks the runway, which is the Spinosaurus. They end up leaving one of the crew behind. He gets killed. The Spinosaurus crashes into the plane. The plane then crashes into the trees. A Spinosaurus follows, kills another of the mercenaries who has the satellite phone. The rest of them kind of flee from the wreckage, run straight into a T-Rex. They only escape the T-Rex because the Spinosaurus kills it. And it's like, I've got a theory in my head that perhaps that T-Rex that they find and kill is the infant T-Rex from the last film, maybe grown up a bit, because we do get the parent T-Rexes reappearing in a later film, but not the baby. So that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, the dinosaurs fight, and the Spinosaurus like easily defeats the T-Rex, like snaps its neck, and there's a lot of artistic liberty and license taken with that. Like this Spinosaurus is not really accurate. I think it was accurate to this understanding of the skeleton at the time, but not necessarily to the understanding of it today. Like, we found more specimens of Spinosaurus since than we did then. Although there are other theories regarding Spinosaurus and how it may have worked. Like, could the spines have been anchors for like neck muscles rather than a sail? Maybe it just had like a really powerful jaw. So I don't know. It's possible. But yeah, it really seems like a kind of screw you to the audience. Like, yeah, I'm the new big bad. Look at this. I've killed your favorite dinosaur, your T-Rex. Oh, yeah, I'm not all that comfortable with it. They then encounter a group of raptors. You may notice this film is very fast paced. There's only about 92 minutes. Like, this is the shortest Jurassic Park film, I believe. Very short. Everything goes by at a clip, and not in a way that necessarily feels rushed. Like, it doesn't feel like huge bits have been cut out or anything, or like the pacing's a mess, but it does feel like this has been designed around the action sequences foremost, with the narrative moments in between being few. Like Grant ends up on the plane, and then it's like when he ends up on the plane, he starts trying to give the tour. And then it's like, oh, okay, we're going to land. And it's like, what? They're landing? Then all of a sudden they're landing. As soon as they're landing, Grant wakes up. As soon as he wakes up, they pretty much crash. Then they get attacked and so on. Everything happens very quickly. And yeah, it reveals that the Kirbys they lied to Grant. They are Eric's parents. They are divorced. And Eric and Amanda's boyfriend, Ben, have got stranded here on the island. And they went to the governments. They went to the Costa Rican government, the American government. They all declined to help. So they brought Grant along because they believed that he had experience on Isla Sorna. And Grant reveals, no, I wasn't on this island. I was on a different island, you know. So yeah, it's interesting. They manage to they begin searching for Eric and Ben. They find Ben's remains still attached to the parasail. They stumble across some velociraptor nests. Billy secretly takes a pair of raptor eggs. They discover an engine compound where a raptor ambushes them. They escape, which then causes a stampede. There's Grant and the final mercenary end up separated from the rest of them. They all take refuge in the trees. The raptors lay a trap and kill the mercenary. And it doesn't work only because Billy manages to stop Amanda from rushing down to help him. And Grant sort of watches them communicating and realizes that they're looking for something. And as he tries to slip away, they ambush him. And then that's when Eric appears, who's dispersed the attack with cans of tear gas. And he takes Grant to this overturned supply truck. And it turns out he's been taking shelter there for 8 weeks. And dialogue lines basically imply that this kid is a secret badass. He says that he's got he says he has a bottle of Tyrannosaur pee, a Tyrannosaur urine, and he says you don't want to know how I got it, but he says he uses it because it scares away a lot of the smaller dinosaurs, but it attracts the big one with the fin, so the Spinosaurus. So yeah, the movie goes on from there, and they eventually leave. Like I said, Ellie's in this as a cameo. Her and Grant meet up early on. She's got a partner and a child, and at one point Alan calls her for help using the satellite phone, which they managed to get back from Spinosaurus droppings. After having some scenes where the Spinosaurus is chasing them with the ringtone coming out of him in a very sort of Captain Hook and the Crocodile way from Peter Pan. They end up going through an aviary where there's pteranodons. Now, the aviary sequence is very similar to something that was in the novels. There is a whole aviary sequence in the first Jurassic Park novel. And there are some interesting ideas here thrown into the dialogue as background elements that aren't really elaborated on. For example, there's the idea that the Spinosaurus is a new creature. It's not. They make reference to something called InGen's List. And it's the idea that InGen had a list of all the dinosaurs that they've cloned. And this has been elaborated on promotional materials for the newer trilogy of films, which I'll get to shortly. But there's the idea that InGen released a list of dinosaurs that they cloned on, in the aftermath of Jurassic Park and The Lost World. They've released this list. And, we've seen that the mercenaries had a list of dinosaurs as well in the previous movie. So the idea that they know what dinosaurs they have. And then there's the idea here that the Spinosaurus was never on that list. But also Billy tries to guess a couple of other dinosaurs that presumably are on the list. But, Grant says, well, they can't be, the baryonyx, for example. And he says, it can't be baryonyx, not with that sail, not of that size. So it's the idea that the engine, since the Lost World, have perhaps done more cloning or have done some secretive things, and there are now new dinosaurs. And this is kind of used as a way of kind of explaining any future changes. And like I said, the modern trilogy does go into this a bit more and explain it a bit better. But yeah, there's several dinosaurs here that only debut in this movie. The Spinosaurus is one of them, but there are several others, and it's implied that they are new creations. And like I said, I'll get to that when I elaborate more on the Jurassic World trilogy. But yeah, I mean, this movie's fine. I don't hate it. It's got some cheesy moments, like the Alan having a nightmare on the plane and seeing a raptor that talks to him is this very memed scene. But I get what they were going for with it. You know, the idea of him just having a nightmare, and then, you know, that bit where you feel like you're about to wake up because you can hear what's going on around you, and it kind of incorporates itself into your dream. Like, you know, have you ever heard music in your dream and it turns out it's actually your alarm clock as you're waking up? You know, that sort of thing. You know, it's his friend, it's Billy calling to wake him up. Like I said, the film's not too bad. There's a moment where obviously we reveal that Billy stole the eggs. Billy and Grant have this huge falling out. Then Billy seemingly heroically sacrifices himself to save Eric and the others from the pteranodons. And it looks almost like Billy's dead and gone. And then, you know, when Grant manages to get hold of the phone, he manages to call to Ellie. Ellie basically calls the army. She calls everyone. So the army, the navy, the SEALs, everyone. They all just storm the beach to try and save them. Because, yeah, at the time that he's on the phone, the Spinosaurus is also attacking the boat that they're on and destroying it, which is, again, almost lifted from the first book. There's a big boat chase scene with the T-Rex. And yeah, it's and when they get to the Marines and the Navy, they reveal that Billy has also been rescued. He's also somehow managed to survive. But not only that, 3 of the pteranodons have managed to escape the Avery and are now flying towards the mainland. And despite the fact they're on a military helicopter, like, nothing seems to be done about it. We just watch them fly off. I don't know. I mean, I don't hate this film. I get why some people would. But to me, this film is fine. Like, it's aggressively mid, but it's fine. The raptors are really interesting in it, and I like that. I do think the films start to focus way too much on the raptors, and we'll get into this as I discuss the Jurassic World trilogy, but I think this is where it starts, and here I'm fine with it because we already had aspects of that with the first film with Grant. You know, he was someone who was researching raptors. That's what he was digging up. That's what he was studying. So the idea that he is trying to explore them and he sees the aspects of like this, not quite society, but like a hierarchy in the pack and how they're communicating and things like that. And he sees that with them and then is able to use that sort of 3D printed chamber to kind of communicate with the raptors at some point in this movie as well. It's quite impressive. And I don't hate it. I don't hate this movie. Like I said, I can see why people would have issues with it, but I think it's fine. It's 92 minutes long. It's really not long enough to overstay its welcome. It does exactly what it needs to do. The action sequences are fine. Like the Spinosaurus, they do use animatronics for it as well. It's not just CGI, despite the fact there's a lot more CGI in this movie than there was in the previous ones. There even is some moments of like dinosaur wonder. They happen quite late in the movie, but the idea is of just seeing dinosaurs and everything being wonderful, as Malcolm says it in the Lost World. He says, "Oh yeah, everything's ooh ah," and then later on it's the screaming and the running. Well, in this one we have the screaming and the running first, and then there's a scene on the boat as they leave the aviary and they're escaping, down the river. You get this moment where they're going past all the herbivores, like drinking in the water, and it's like, yeah, it's quite lovely. Like there is something magical about the idea of bringing dinosaurs back to life and seeing that world. And, there's elements of that when you look out the windows of the plane as well before they're trying to land. You're seeing this other world, this lost world. And, I think everything this film is trying to do, it does well. Whether or not you agree with whether things it's trying to do are good is a different matter entirely. Like they establish the Spinosaurus as a very capable threat, but then they also, address how these characters can kind of survive it. They address the raptors and they address why the raptors are there. They even try and do some character work. Like Paul and Amanda throughout the movie do kind of, make peace with each other. Not quite, they don't quite end up back together or anything, but they do reconcile. Like you could tell, you get the impression their divorce was hard on them, and it was hard on Eric. And then at the end of this, like they reconcile. They feel more complete as a family. They're not back together as a family at all, but it's like, no, they're together and they're safe, and I like that. And it's small. It's one of those where the quieter scenes, the character scenes, do just enough that they don't detract from the action. They don't stop this being an action movie or a thriller movie in more of a way than the previous two were. Like the scenes in this the quiet scenes aren't quite as long or developed as they were in the previous movies, and there's nowhere near as much introspection or discussion. But what's here is still fine. And I think that's the best way to describe Jurassic Park 3, is it's fine. I don't hate it. I don't dislike it at all. But, if you just want a short romp with some dinosaurs in, you can't really go wrong with this one. Like, it does what it sets out to do. The action sequences are good. There's some really good visuals. The aviary scene is fantastic. There's some really good moments in that. As with the initial ambush from the raptors, and the boat scene with the Spinosaurus is very, very impressive. Nice mix of real and of computer animated and practical effects that I think works really well. So yeah, it's serviceable. The only problem is it didn't do as well. It didn't make as much money, obviously. It only made $368.8 million off the back of a $93 million budget. So, it did okay, not brilliantly though. And it even got nominated at the Razzie Awards in 2002 for worst remake or sequel. I don't think it's that bad at all. Like I said, I don't think it's terrible. It's watchable. It's impressive enough. Like visually, it's very impressive. It has shortcomings, but there's some moments in it that are like genuinely laugh out loud funny. There's some moments in it that are quite genuinely terrifying. Like one that stands out is the bridge scene in the aviary where Eric walks into the fog and then you hear something thunk onto the path, and then Eric's walking forward and a pteranodon walks out of the fog towards him. That's terrifying. You know? But yeah, the only problem is it doesn't kind of... There's kind of an indecisiveness of what the franchise was going to be after that. Like, there were plans for a Jurassic Park 4, you know, and especially the idea that the raptors would continue to evolve. Like, by this point, it was quite well accepted in paleontological fields that raptors had feathers, and you start to see that in this. Like, some of the male raptors have like quills on the back of their heads, and they've got these new patterns and stuff like that. And the idea was that if they did go to a fourth movie, we probably would have had some raptors with more realistic plumage. And loads of ideas tinkered around. Like, there were ideas of like dinosaur human hybrids, which would have been bizarre. There was a cartoon series that was planned as well. I had a whole toy line planned for it as well. The toy line released, the cartoon didn't, and it was going to be called Chaos Effect. And again, that had kind of hybrid dinosaurs, but not human hybrids this time. They were just like hybrids of different dinosaurs. And it was going to bring back Malcolm, Gran, and a few other characters. Chaos Effect, I think that was called. Chaos something. Chaos Effect or Chaos Theory, something like that. But none of this ever really panned out, and the franchise kind of sat in limbo for a while. Until sort of the mid-2010s. So Steven Spielberg had been involved in the development of Jurassic Park 4 for a while. Like, starting from like May 2001, there were already ideas. Originally, Joe Johnston was not interested in returning for another one. Kathleen Kennedy, who went on to do the Star Wars sequel films, she was in place as a producer with Spielberg as an executive producer. And there were several scripts put around. Like, there was William Monahan was announced as a screenwriter, and a release date got set for mid 2005 originally. Some reports on that early story include dinosaurs going to the Costa Rican mainland, a team of experts including Grant and Malcolm charting an expedition to an offshore island, discovering the dinosaurs breeding freely. Part of the plot would also involve the characters devising a way to stop the spread of the dinosaurs and perhaps prevent ecological disaster. There was also an idea of genetically engineered human dinosaur mercenaries, which there is some concept art for, and it's very weird. Like, it'd be hard to imagine how that would look now, never mind in the early 2000s. Monahan's first draft of the script got finished 2003. He then left the project to go work on Kingdom of Heaven. He got replaced by John Sayles, who wrote a couple of drafts of the script. In one of those drafts, a mercenary named Nick Harris would be charged with training a team of genetically modified Deinonychus to use on rescue missions, as well as to combat drug dealers. And the idea of a human training dinosaurs, that came directly from Spielberg. But as it went on, by April 2005, the film was postponed. Spielberg had been very dissatisfied with a lot of the ongoing script revisions, and project stalled for a while. Spielberg hoped to come back to it with Frank Marshall, his producing partner, after they did Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Spielberg wanted to get Joe Johnston back to direct it. Johnston, was involved, then he wasn't involved, then he was involved, then he wasn't involved. Eventually, he decided he might come back and help develop the project a bit more with Spielberg after he'd finished Captain America: The First Avenger. But and eventually, plans grew to be like, oh, okay, well, we'll do a new trilogy of films, and so on. Um, but yeah, several drafts were developed. Several were, none of them got approved. Eventually, Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver got hired to write the script in 2012. They're a husband and wife screenwriting and film production duo. There was actually some dispute about the writing credits for this, for reasons I'll get to later on, because Colin Trevorrow and his own producing partner, Derek Connolly, his writing partner, they came in and they rewrote the script, but there was elements that were still coming from Jaffa and Silver, so yeah, a lot of debates and disputes, and actually ended up going to courts and going through the Writers Guild of America and stuff like that. They got hired to write the script, and they incorporated three ideas that came directly from Spielberg. Firstly, the fully functioning dinosaur theme park. Second, a human who has a relationship with trained raptors. And three, a human-eating dinosaur that escapes and has to be stopped. And there was also some more ideas that came from the original books, specifically in this one, the concept of a dinosaur with a chameleon-like ability that could render itself nearly invisible. That was actually used for the Carnotaurs in the Lost World novel and had not been used in the previous films. Now, Colin Trevorrow was hired as director after Kathleen Kennedy left in 2013, which she did because February 2013 she knew she was going to be involved in the upcoming Star Wars trilogy. So she left the project. Colin Trevorrow came in, helped, like I said, with Derek Connolly, rewrote the earlier draft while retaining the story ideas. The release was delayed by a year to give them time to perfect the script, and eventually the title was confirmed as Jurassic World, and the release date set for June 12th, 2015. It's set 22 years after the events of the original, and is considered a direct sequel to that film. Although it does keep Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 as canon in the series, but it does kind of ignore their events in some ways because they occur on a different island. Like, most of the connections between those two films and the modern Jurassic World trilogy exist in kind of supplementary material, things like the Dinosaur Protection Group ARG website that was created and things like that. Originally, there was an expectation from several cast members to reprise their roles, but obviously that was all kind of over by 2008. They didn't want to bring back the other characters unless there would be a good reason for them to be involved in the story. So as a result, the only one they actually brought back was Dr. Henry Wu, who is the scientist responsible for recreating the dinosaurs, considering him a logical choice. I find this really interesting because Henry Wu doesn't survive the first book. He has a much more prominent role in the book, but he doesn't survive it. So having him be a kind of main character who appears in all three films in this trilogy, very, very interesting. And then obviously we've got the lead roles of Bryce Dallas Howard, Chris Pratt, Vincent D'Onofrio, Irfan Khan are being cast as well. So yeah, it's a good cast, good production. The movie itself, like I said, it completely sidesteps 2 and 3, leaves Site B completely unexplored. We go back to the original island, Isla Nublar, and we get to see Jurassic World open to the public in its full majesty. And I love it. Like, it's there's something really charming about seeing this dream that Hammond had realized. Whatever Hammond's motivations for doing it are, there's something really nice about it. And yeah, and some bits of it are just charming. Like seeing the island, seeing the dinosaurs around it, seeing the rides, seeing the attractions. I do find the idea that people are getting bored of dinosaurs and that they need something new and exciting. I'm not sure that idea works for me. Like, I get the idea of trying to make the hybrid dinosaurs, but the idea that people are getting bored of dinosaurs. Like, how many people still go to places like Disneyland or Universal Studios every single year? And how often do they change their attractions? This is a place with dinosaurs. And when you consider it's a resort destination that would involve a substantial travel cost, substantial fees, like this is, there'd be such a small population of the world that would have actually experienced Jurassic World, even if it had been open for like 15 years, say, within the timeline, which we know isn't the case. But even if it had been open for a very, very long time by this point, say it had been open for a decade, the idea that after a decade people are getting bored by the fact there's dinosaurs. I'm sorry, the fact that there were existing dinosaurs would change the face of the earth. And the fact that this is something that's known about in this world for a while, but now we can actually go and see them, and we can experience them. We can be close to them. We can watch. Not just scientists or soldiers, but like actual people can go and watch a Tyrannosaurus eat, or go and watch, go to a petting zoo with a baby Triceratops, or can go and watch, travel on a boat sailing past brachiosaurs and stegosauruses. No way people would get bored of that. I get what they're trying to say and saying so that they can create the hybrid dinosaurs, but yeah, it's one of the few bits that does make me go, huh? Another one that does that is Lowry. He's one of the techs in the base, and he's wearing the merchandise of the original Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park never opened. How does he have that merchandise? The park never officially opened, and that opening meeting where it was deciding the fate of the park, pre-release, saw the deaths of 7 people. So I, I don't see him wearing that. It's ridiculous. But yes, this movie is very, very different from the previous Jurassic Park movies. The Indominus Rex, the hybrid creature that we get introduced to, but just by its very design, as well as its actions in the movie, changed the whole tone of the movie. This is much more of a horror movie in a lot of ways than the previous films are, and there was elements of rising dread in the previous movies, and like I said, the book was very much a horror novel. This is a slasher. This has a body count approaching a slasher movie. This is a monster movie. The Indominus Rex is a monster that needs to be stopped, and it's a similar way to the Spinosaurus in Jurassic Park 3 almost, but cranked up to 11. We also get the introduction of the idea of dinosaurs being in the military. The character of Vic Hoskins wants to train the raptors and use them in military maneuvers. I can't imagine. I know animals have been used by the military for years. Dolphins still get used to plant mines and stuff. And raptors are at least that intelligent by the logic of this series itself. But I don't know. It just seems a bit of a stretch because they do seem uncontrollable. The other animals that the army uses aren't an efficient predator like that. This would be just like the army trying to use crocodiles. It seems more, or snakes or something or lions. You wouldn't see them trying to use lions and tigers in the military, so why would they be trying to use raptors? There's also the first kill of a woman character in this, which is another issue that I have with it. It seems like it's been specifically designed by, in fact it was specifically designed by Trevorrow to shock, because the character does not deserve to die, and at least not in the way that she does. She dies in this incredibly graphic way. She gets snatched up by a pteranodon, carried over, dropped into the mosasaur pit. The pteranodon flies down to try to attack her again. Just as it's trying to pick her up out of the water, that's when the mosasaur comes up from underneath and kills them both. And the camera actually, from the minute she's snatched up, follows her, and we see this death, and it's not graphic in the same way as like an adult horror movie would be, but it's very drawn out sequence and seems almost gleeful in the violence. And I don't think it's deserved. Like, it seems very harsh on the character because the character Zara, like she was just someone who was saddled with two kids and didn't really want to look at them. She had other stuff to do, and it's like she's just being punished for that negligence, which seems really harsh. Um, yeah, there's some new concepts for the raptors, like Owen showing that you can train the raptors. Um, Claire being this quite abrasive character, um, very kind of by the books, by the numbers. Also, kind of exploring this history that she has with Owen. The two of them work really well as leads. I will say, Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard, both very capable actors. They're both very good in their roles. Um, Claire does have a bit of plot armor when she's running away from Rexy in heels, because you'd imagine that Rexy, the T Rex from the original movie, could catch up to her, considering we know how fast Rexy can run. Um, but at the same time, it's like Rexy's stalking Claire because Claire's using the flare. And we've seen that flare gets used to kind of lure Rexy when to hunt, when to eat. So yeah, there's definitely kind of a stalking aspect. So it's explainable, but it can feel a bit bizarre. But yeah, there's good stuff in this movie. I feel like I'm ripping bits of it apart. There is good stuff. Like the Indomitus is this quite terrifying, quite scary threat. The camouflage abilities I think he used really well. The music by Michael Giacchino, which incorporates a lot of John Williams' classic themes in the same way that Don Davis did in the third film, works really well. Stan Winston had actually passed before filming, but the Stan Winston studio, Legacy Effects, I think it was called now, provided a lot of maquettes and animatronics that Industrial Light and Magic would go on to use throughout the movie. Um, there were some animatronics that were actually used in the film that you don't realize are animatronics because they've been enhanced by CGI. Like there's one with a raptor head that Hoskins and Owen are kind of able to interact with, because it's in like a cage, but they've CGI'd the raptor's eyes so they're much more emotive, and its mouth is snarling and things like that. So it's like the structure there is the animatronic or like a maquette, but the CGI is enhancing it, and it works really well. Um, but there's a lot more CGI in this. There's a lot of tendency towards doing things in the CGI, like the final battle with the Indominus. So the Indominus versus Rexy versus Blue. The Indominus also taking over the Raptor Pack. I did like. That was done really well, and like the reveal that it had Raptor DNA. Although that was a reveal that you could see coming a mile off. And raptors have always been kind of given this, inflated role in these movies, and I think it works. Like the raptors are definitely one of the more interesting takes on dinosaurs, and so yeah, bringing them in with the Indominus and stuff like that was good. I liked it. But yeah, the only bit of the final fight that's a bit anticlimactic is the fact that Mosasaur just immediately jumps out of the lake and takes down the Indominus. Like that does feel very anticlimactic as well. Also, I'm not sure how they're able to get a full grown great white shark, because that great white shark's like an endangered species, and they feed one to the Mosasaur. Like unless they're cloning those as well, possibly, potentially. Like, does Jurassic Park clone the goats and the stuff? Because they'd be shut down by animal rights groups. Let's not even pretend they wouldn't. I like the fact that Rexy has got scars as well on its model, like from the raptors in the first film. that was very cool. Like, there's a lot of attention to detail there. Like, if you look at Rexy in depth, like, Rexy has a lot of very interesting scars and stuff. Like, Rexy becomes a much more of a character. Blue as a character as well, very good, very well developed. And Blue will go on to be quite prominent throughout this trilogy. The final four characters all feel a bit untouchable. Like, the two kids and Owen and Claire. Like, I don't necessarily want a kid to die in the Jurassic Park films, but kids are always safe. Kids are always safe in Jurassic Park. Um, and the romantic tension between Owen and Claire, like, I get where they're coming from on it. And the actors, like I said, they're very skilled. They do what they do very, very well. But it doesn't feel justified. It feels like the um, epitome of what I think it's Sandra Bullock's character's final line in Speed, where she's like, "Oh, traumatic event." No, I think it's Keanu Reeves says it. Traumatic events, relationships based on traumatic events never last. You know, and it's like, so the fact they break up in the sequel, that fits really well like that. But there's some good stuff. I like it. It overall, it's a very good film. I think it went on to be one of the most successful films in this franchise. I think the first film is the only one that beats it, but like, this was one of the best performing films of all time when it released. I think the first one only beats it because the first one you can adjust for inflation and it's been re-released. Um, but yeah, this is good. Released to this huge acclaim, became the third highest grossing film ever after Avatar and Titanic, at least until Force Awakens came out later the same year. Reviews were very positive, generally, but it seemed like audiences enjoyed it a lot more than critics, being more accepting of it as like a blockbuster. Um, and it went on to like kickstart this second wave for the franchise. Like, the sequel got greenlit almost immediately. There was an animated spin-off that entered development. Um, Lots of good stuff. One of the main criticisms was the depictions of the dinosaurs. Like, at when the time the first film came out, because of Michael Crichton's own interests in paleontology and a lot of the research that he put into the book, and obviously the short time frame between the book being released in '89, I think it is, and the first film coming out in like '93. Was it '89 or is it '91? Whatever. Whatever the book came out and whenever the film came out, there's it's a narrow time frame, and so a lot of the first film features a lot of like cutting edge research at the time in the paleontological fields, because a lot of it came from the book and Michael Crichton's own fascination with it. Thing is, in the 22 years between that first film and this film, paleontology has changed quite a lot. Like, we now know that quite a lot of dinosaurs have feathers, for example. And like I said, there was an attempt to include this in Jurassic Park 3. This movie very deliberately makes an effort to go back to the dinosaur styles of the first film, by which I mean there are no feathers. You know, these dinosaurs are scaly, and so it feels like it's ignoring a lot of the new discoveries and knowledge, and it's not as cutting edge and not as lauded um, for depicting accurate dinosaurs in the same way that the first one was. And on one hand, that's a good thing and also a very bad thing, because I think a lot of the pop culture's perception of what dinosaurs are, like general audience perception of what dinosaurs are, comes from these movies and movies like them. And obviously, because Jurassic Park and then Jurassic World became phenomenally successful, that means that, you know, this idea of what dinosaurs are perseveres over a lot of actual fact. Like, a Tyrannosaurus Rex should have feathers. Based on what we know of it, it should have feathers. It doesn't in this film. And it kind of can't, because Rexy has to be the same T-Rex from the first film. You know, the raptors have to hold their limbs in the same way and things like that. So this is kind of like a retrograde step, a step backwards, as it were. And Trevorrow actually came out and said, you know, it's inaccurate because it's a science fiction film. It's not a documentary, which is a fair point. And they did actually write an element into the film of Henry Wu kind of addressing this, saying that all the inaccuracies are because the dinosaurs are not dinosaurs. They're genetically engineered animals. Like, they're designed to look like what pop culture thinks of as dinosaurs. That's a smart inclusion. Um, yeah, and you know, we have elements. The science of this world has been built up. We know that the dinosaurs have their gaps in their DNA filled with amphibian DNA. What if one of the bits that's missing is the bit that leads to feathers? One of the genetic information markers for feathers is missing, so it's replaced with frog DNA, and now suddenly they don't have feathers. They can't grow them. Yeah, but I mean, feathered dinosaurs were planned at one point, but obviously, I think because it is the more direct sequel, I can see why they didn't, especially with Rexy. I think that would have been jarring if suddenly the T Rex had feathers. And but of all things, one of the things that really exposed this how this kind of dominates pop culture is there was a Power Rangers series. Well, it was a Super Sentai series first of all, called Zuden Sentai Kyuruja, which featured dinosaurs and dinosaur spirits in Japan. And that series did feature, as two of the dinosaur animals that were giving the Rangers their powers, a Velociraptor and a T Rex. And they both had feathers in the Sentai, and they were regularly depicted as having feathers in their when we saw them as dinosaurs, like CGI dinosaurs. Now, that series got adapted into Power Rangers Dino Charge and Power Rangers Super Dino Charge when it came over to America. In all of the American footage, they have over redone the CGI for the T-Rex. Every time we see it, they've redone the T-Rex as CGI so that it no longer has feathers. I think the Raptor still does, but the T-Rex doesn't. And it's so jarring if you've seen both of them, which I have. I quite liked Kyoryuger. And yeah, it's I think that's a perfect sort of example about how, because these films don't show feathered dinosaurs, people aren't willing to accept feathered dinosaurs in the West. Like, because of the popular culture. Like, the idea of a T Rex being covered in feathers. And, you know, it's most likely as well, a T Rex probably wouldn't have roared. It would probably have made a noise more akin to like a goose rather than the noises that the T Rex make in this. But no, it's like we can't accept that in our heads because of depictions like this. So yeah, that's some interesting little food for thought there. So let's go through and look at the rest of the Jurassic World trilogy. Firstly came Fallen Kingdom. Fallen Kingdom to me feels a little bit like a placeholder in some ways. Like I don't think it's necessarily a great film that stands alone all by itself. It feels more like it's something that needs to be done to set up what comes next. And also feels like it's a film of two very distinct halves. Like, it's not bad in parts of it, but it does overall feel very jumbled. Like, the tonal changes make it very hard to get a feel on it. The opening on the island is very good. Like, the whole idea of, you know, do we save the dinosaurs from the island? We'll go in, we'll save them, but then it turns out to do a sort of Lost World, like, no, we're actually here to capture the dinosaurs, not just to rescue them. That kind of aspect I really like. And obviously the scene with the volcano exploding and everything like that. There's some very great visuals there. You know, there's a lot of elements that harken back to the original, sometimes quite deliberately, as well as the previous film, like seeing the the park of the previous film, but now it's just completely destroyed. Um, there was an element of that in the previous film as well, like where they go back to the old visitor center. The kids end up there. I didn't really cover that, but that was also another bit in that last film that I really enjoyed. Um, seeing the wrecked skeletons and things like that, and the raptors and things like that. It was just fun. It was nice seeing that stuff again. We do get some interesting philosophical discussions, or at least I think so. With I don't think the movie does a great job of addressing them, but the ideas of whether the dinosaurs should be allowed to die out again. Like we see Ian Malcolm testifying before like a Senate or something, where they seem to support his positions from the previous films that the dinosaurs should just be allowed to die, like they're not supposed to be here. Meanwhile, you've got Claire, who's formed a dinosaur protection group, um, which is a good idea, but seems a bit forced. Like it's not quite clear why she chose to save the dinosaurs. Like I don't know, maybe a callback to like her hard work in creating them in the first place. She didn't seem to see them as much more than just like a product in the previous movie. So her wanting to save them seems a bit out of left field. I do think the movie puts a lot of emphasis on Blue being like the last of her kind, especially because when sporting websites have pointed out that several of the dinosaurs have actually died off again in the time that they've been left on Isla Nublar, and there are some dinosaurs in this that we've also never seen before. Like Allosaurus makes its debut in this movie, so does Baryonyx. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of focus on Blue being the last raptor. I'm sure she's not the only one who's the last of her kind. Like we never see another T-Rex apart from Rexy. And if Site B is also a thing, then presumably there are also raptors there. So I don't know. The island scenes start quite dystopic, seeing the destroyed park, seeing everything being a bit sad. Then there's like the double cross from the mercenaries, turns into a bit of a disaster movie for a bit as they try and all escape and leave. And then you get the traumatic end, especially with the death of the Brachiosaurus. It all seems very sudden and very relentless. Like there's not really much. Like once we arrive on the island, there's not much space to breathe again until we're back on the boats coming away from it. The scene with Blue being injured and needing a transfusion seems a bit like padding. It feels like it's there to endear us a bit more to Blue and also to feature Rexy a bit more because Rexy isn't being featured. And that's all it seems to be there to accomplish, which is a shame. I mean, it does have the aspect of Blue no longer being pure, which sort of negates what Wu wanted her for towards the end of the movie. So there is that. But then when we get to the Lockwood estate, that's when the film takes on a very different tone and feels less like a disaster movie and more like a bit of a conspiracy thriller almost for part of it, because we get the whole dinosaurs being sold on the black market, also ridiculously cheaply. Like they go for what you would consider paltry sums. Like I think they would have cost more than that to make than what they were being sold for. It's ridiculous. Like this is a world like not to get too alternate history about this, but this is a world where this sort of advanced genetic cloning technique has existed for nearly 30 years. And these are the only dinosaurs that have ever been made. Anyone who would want to recreate dinosaurs, who would want to make more of these, this is their chance to own them, to do that. This technology that InGen has kind of held a patent on for the last however long. This is their chance to get a first-hand look at that technology by looking at the creatures that technology created. But instead, they're being sold as like, something for a group of rich oligarchs to hunt, or an attack dog, or a status pet. And it's like it doesn't feel right. Like, it feels really stupid on the part of the villains as well. Like, they could, but then I suppose that it's being done on the black market. It's not being done legitimately, so it's going to attract criminals. But yeah, meh. And then you've got all the stuff with Mills dealing with Lockwood and Maisie as well, and yeah, it's interesting, but it's it's it doesn't feel like Jurassic Park. That's the problem with it. The reveal of the human cloning, and Maisie being a clone, that seems perfectly obvious in hindsight as something that should have been in this universe by now, and is a very logical way to progress the advancing science of this universe. But again, like I said, it doesn't feel very Jurassic Park. It's focusing on the humans, not the dinosaurs, or not the interactions between the humans and the dinosaurs. Like, it's completely focused on the humans. Um, the film then follows the Indoraptor once it breaks out in a manner that seems almost like something from like a stalking horror film, which is probably helped quite a bit by the fact the environment is this big rich manor house in the middle of nowhere. Um, it works quite well, but it doesn't help the movie feel any less disjointed. The fact it feels like it's again another completely different movie. Uh, and once again, we get Blue coming to the rescue to save them, and all the dinosaurs end up being released onto the mainland by Maisie. With the line, "They're like me." It's cheesy. I see what they're going for. Tallulah does not think it works. Like, she watched it with me in the cinema. She mocks that line quite openly. I think I can see what they're going for. I don't think it works, but I don't mock it as much as my wife does, because like I said, I get what they're going for. And having the dinosaurs on the mainland is a really interesting idea. It does just feel forced in the movie. Like I said, the fact that none of the other characters try to stop her or argue against her decision to release a lot of dangerous foreign creatures into the North American ecosystem seems really bizarre. But it is what it is. The final montage of the movie, though, that is annoying as hell, because it just feels like trailer bait. Like, bits like that's the second time the mosasaur appears after we saw the opening of the movie where the spies were on the island and the mosasaur managed to escape. That opening on the island, very, very good as well. I do like that cold open, especially that shot where the lightning hits and we see the T-Rex stalking behind that poor dude. It's like, that's quite good. It's very well directed. Um, but yeah, the final montage just feels off. Even, the only thing that saves it really is Malcolm's narration. Um, yeah, the movie's just a very different style. Part of that was because the director was different. This was directed by J.A. Bayona after his work on A Monster Calls, but it's still written by Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly. It had much more mixed reviews from critics, and it was not as successful as the previous film, obviously, but still very profitable. It also features more dinosaurs than we've previously seen. Like I said, several dinosaurs appear here for the first time, and several others that haven't been seen for a long time reappear as well. Um, it also features more animatronics than the previous sequels. Like, there's a lot of animatronics in this. And Spielberg actually helped give Bayona advice on how to film those animatronics and how to film around them. The final scene that they created for this film, though, was the CGI death of the Brachiosaurus. And they specifically designed it and meant it to be the same Brachiosaurus from the first shot of the dinosaurs in the original Jurassic Park film, which they did by obviously making the model match, but also using a lot of the same animations. And that final shot was only finished like days before the actual release of the film. it's a real tug on your heartstrings moment, that bit. Um, that then led to so that was 2018. In between, while the next film was being worked on, we got a short a year later called Battle at Big Rock, and I like Battle at Big Rock. I really do. It's kind of framed as almost like the first real encounter between humans and dinosaurs since the changed status quo of the series, and echoes Malcolm's sort of final words in Fallen Kingdom. Um, and it's a campsite in North America, somewhere in like the Pacific Northwest, I think. Um, and there's a whole load of people camping anyway, despite the fact they're aware of the dinosaurs. Like everyone's aware of the dinosaurs by this point, and that they're in North America. Um, but they're out camping anyway. Standard American, like I'm not going to let it ruin my life kind of thing. Although the main family isn't like that. This is just a nice blended family trying to have a nice vacation. And they do a good job, I think, of establishing these characters and their relationships quite quickly. With it being a short, um, it's quite thrilling in its own right. It's almost like a microcosm of what we'd expect from a Jurassic Park film at this point. We get the characters introduced. We get to see the dinosaurs in a way that feels quite wondrous when we get the Nasutoceratops and the infant one coming and exploring the campsite. And the human characters kind of watching them through their windows in their caravans. That's quite lovely. Then they come under threat unexpectedly because the Allosaurus comes in and they end up barely surviving the encounter. The found footage clips in the credits are one of the highlights for me. I think they work really well. They all then get reused in the next film, but I like the way they work. Like there's a kid running from some compies, which is being recorded by a parent. There's a dash cam footage of a guy who crashes into a Stegosaurus on a mountain road. There was one in there for the mosasaur, but I can't remember what it was doing, eating a surfer or something, I think. Or was it attacking the fishing boat, or was that in the last film? I can't remember. But yeah, it works okay. You can see why those bits of footage were reused in the next film as well, because they are clearly quite good. Oh, the pteranodon that attacks the doves at the wedding as well, that was also very good, very funny. This one, Battle of Big Rock, has Trevorrow returning as both the writer and the director. He wrote and directed this. And Emily Carmichael of Pacific Rim Uprising also came in and helped with the writing. Both of them then returned for the final film in the trilogy, which is Dominion. Now, Dominion was delayed because of COVID, and there was also a theatrical version and an extended version that released on home media. I've watched the extended version. I've not watched the theatrical version. I missed it in the cinemas for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into. But I watched the extended version on DVD. I feel safe in saying that the extended version is better. Having seen a lot of the critical feedback that this film got, I feel very safe in saying that the extended version was the far superior product. It was one of the most expensive films ever made, although it had a budget greatly reduced from the previous movie. Like Fallen Kingdom actually cost more, but I think as well there's also the marketing budget to consider, the fact that it had been delayed several times. It was a big expensive film. But Dominion itself is the movie that really focuses on this new world of humans and dinosaurs, and how that change has happened. And in that aspect, I found it incredibly satisfying. I like the bits of world building that it does. And, I've spoken before when I've done previous episodes where I was talking about, I mentioned this when I talked about Spider-Man Homecoming. I mentioned this when I talked about Pacific Rim. I like the smaller bits of world building that highlight that this is a very different world. And when you get to a certain level of sequel, I think that becomes essential. And Pacific Rim managed to do it in the first movie by highlighting, the change in the world. Um, but Spider-Man: Homecoming, where we see the impact on culture when kids are playing games using the superheroes, and that's what I mean. We see it in this. We see um, scenes like how they're reacting to the dinosaurs, how we see the dinosaurs being treated, how we learn what governments and criminals and all sorts are all trying to do about the dinosaurs. Like the Department of Fish and Wildlife, were dealing with dinosaurs. It's very, very cool. I like it. I will say some of the scenes that we see of the dinosaurs do a brilliant job of capturing the sort of the wonder that we've seen in the previous films in a new way. Like, I very much like the scene with the Apatosaurus in the snow on the construction site, and like everyone just kind of stops and watches it, and then they kind of, Maisie comes in and kind of tells them a way to kind of lure it away. That works. There's some bits maybe that don't make quite as much sense, like the drive-in, um, which the drive-in sequence was actually released shortly before Dominion, in like the Dominion prologue, along with the bit 65 million years earlier, which I think does feature a feathered T-Rex, which is quite cool. Um, that those prologue bits were released separately, but were incorporated back into the extended edition. And again, the idea that there's a T-Rex somewhere in the North Americas, so drive-ins will stay open, because of course they will. We've seen what a T-Rex could do in San Diego, but we'll keep drive-ins in small towns open. Yeah, it makes sense. Although I suppose seeing the actions of some Americans in the wake of the pandemic, perhaps it makes more sense than I think it does. um, I do think, going back to the prologue, I do think it works a lot better as part of the film, because it allows us to get a better look at real dinosaurs, like the ones that are far more accurate than InGen's creations. Um, we then see that Blue now has a baby, suggesting that she's reproduced asexually, which is something that is starting to become more identified in nature recently. Like, there was a story of, I think it was a condor, like a North American condor, who laid a series of viable eggs without having mated. And, obviously condors are birds that exist very similar to dinosaurs. We've also seen this recently with some species in aquariums. There's, I think, was it a stingray or a manta ray that I read about in an aquarium in Asia somewhere, I want to say, that had fallen pregnant despite not sharing a tank with a male in over a year. So yeah, asexual pathogenic reproduction is something that is becoming more common. So the fact that Blue's able to do it, she's the last of her species. This is a similar sort of aspect to the whole, the fact the dinosaurs were breeding in the first place by changing gender. But it echoes one of the key sentiments of this whole series, which is life finds a way. And that's one of the taglines of Jurassic Park, and always has been. And that's exactly what happens here. Blue has had a baby. Um, we get to see Owen working for the Department of Parks and Wildlife, which is pretty cool. He's helping people round up dinosaurs, putting his skills to use. There's quite a few good ideas here. The thing is, I feel that the extended version gives all of these separate ideas room to breathe. And I just imagine that, like, having watched the extended version, I can't imagine what you could cut. And obviously the theatrical version did cut stuff, but everything in here feels like it's necessary, because it was all exploring one of the characters to tie back and bring together what is quite a disparate plot in some way. all the plot threads kind of tie back to Dodgson, who's returning from the first movie, played by a different actor for reasons that I won't get into, but you're free to Google yourself if you wish. Although, yeah, there's a reason he didn't return. And the new actor they've got for him is great as well. And he's the leader of Biosyn, and he's kind of been indirectly responsible for the events of the whole series up until this point, if you really think about it. But yeah, all the plot threads, all the main characters, every aspect of this does tie back to Biosyn and Dodgson in some way. And I think the conclusion does bring everything together in the right way. So yeah, I can't see what you could cut and have it be satisfying. But yeah, we'll get to that, I suppose. Biosyn in this seem to have positioned themselves as the major genomics company. They're responsible for all of the dinosaurs, keeping their safety. Several of which are also brand new creations in this. Like, there seem to be several new species in this, including two animals that actually predate the dinosaurs, including Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon appears in this, and there's several of them, and they predate the dinosaurs by several million years. There's also another Triassic era creature that isn't a dinosaur, but is identified as one, Lystrosaurus, which appears in the black market sequences. So yeah, that's interesting. Ellie gets brought back into the plot in a way that I feel is quite organic and is true to her character. She's investigating the locusts, which are also another new creature, these bioengineered giant locusts. And it feels like she's got much more of a leading role than the rest of the ensemble, which seems. And it does seem like it's a bit outside of her previous experience, but not in a logical way. Like, she was a paleobotanist. One of the things you'd identify as a paleobotanist is if you're working with plants, extinct plants, you're going to be aware of what eats those plants. And so that's why she's investigating the biosyn, the locusts, and she makes the link to biosyn, especially when she gets hold of a live one. And notices the plants that they're eating. Like, it all fits within her realm of experience in a way that doesn't feel illogical. It makes sense that she might be the person that notices this stuff. She then seeks help from Alan Grant, who returns. We learn that Malcolm is working at Biosyn and is after her help to expose Dodgson. Like, he's the one who kind of put her on to what she's investigating. Malcolm himself was clued in by Ramsey Cole, who is like Dodgson's right hand, but is very clearly not on the same side as Dodgson, like very clearly trying to expose him. Maisie and Beta get kidnapped by some criminals. Beta is Blue's baby. They get kidnapped by criminals, which then leads Owen and Claire to hunt for them and brings them into the plot. That leads them going through some illegal black markets, and like I said, that's where you get the non-dinosaur creature, the Lystrosaurus. It's where you also get a lot of actual props and indications that there are new dinosaurs. Like this black market takes place in Malta, and there are new dinosaurs here, and some new dinosaurs that seem to be being used as bioweapons, like the Atrociraptors, who use a similar sort of targeting mechanism to the Indoraptor, and some that just seem to be being used in like pit fights, like the Lystrosaurus or Baryonyx. So yeah, the implication, and then some that seem to be being eaten. Like, there's a whole food market that seems to be eating dinosaurs. So yeah, it feels like if not Biosyn, there's someone out there breeding and creating all these new dinosaur creatures. And that's without even getting to the ones that we find at the Biosyn compound later on, like Therizinosaurus. Owen and Claire end up getting support from Kayla. A whole load of dinosaurs get loosed on Malta. Kayla's character in this, she's a new character. She's a pilot. She's smuggling. She ends up helping them because she saw Maisie being abducted. And she has a conscience, I suppose. Doesn't really care so much about the dinosaurs, but seems to care about a person. Um, so yeah, mercenary, but not completely. Um, the issue becomes with the film is that when these plot lines do eventually converge and the cast come together, my biggest issue becomes that there becomes a very real lack of risk because um, Kayla, Owen, and Claire make their own way to the biosyn compound. Sattler, Malcolm, and Ellie are already there, and Ellie and Grant uh, are together, and Malcolm and Ramsey are together. And so there's different groups, and then obviously there's Maisie and Beta there, and they're both prisoners as well. So, and what happens is, despite these being these large and terrifying new creatures in the Giganotosaurus, the Therizinosaurus, which has a very tense scene with Claire where she kind of lands there, and the Therizinosaurus is blind, so it can't see her, but it kind of knows she's there, so she has to be very stealthy and hide under the water and everything. Very clever. I did like that scene an awful lot. Um, as well as obviously Rexy, because Rexy returns in this as well. It feels like there's a lot of dinosaurs around them and they're constantly being put in threat, but it never feels like they're not going to survive. It doesn't feel like any of them are in danger. And it feels almost like we needed one of the originals to die to give us that threat. Like, none of them are even severely injured. Like, there's a point where Malcolm tries to save the others from the Giganotosaurus, and it's like that would have been a perfect time maybe just to kill Malcolm off. Not that I want to kill Malcolm off. I love Malcolm. He's one of my favorite characters. He was clearly one of Michael Crichton's favorite characters. So from that aspect, you kind of don't want to kill him. And obviously Jeff Goldblum's great, but it's like his sacrifice would have maybe spurred something on. Because what happens then is you have scenes of them escaping this this compound surrounded by dinosaurs with the forest on fire because of reasons involving the locusts, and you have Owen, Claire, Kayla, Maisie, Alan, Ellie, and Malcolm all in these multiple encounters with dinosaurs and all surviving. And some of the encounters are fun. Like, they are fun. Like, there's a bit where a Dilophosaurus like comes at Claire and is like right up in her face, and it's got the frills out and everything. And then just before it can spit, Owen grabs it under the neck and slams its mouth closed and kind of throws it away because obviously he knows how to handle these animals. But yeah, it doesn't feel like anyone's in any risk at all. The only character we expect to die is Dodgson, and that's because he's the villain. Even Henry Wu comes into this, and he's a much more dejected shell of a man in this. Like, he's been used by Dodgson to create that locust, the one that's attacking the crops. That locust is on the verge of causing like a worldwide ecological disaster, like destroying, causing mass famine. And Wu is obviously really guilty over that and really affected by his part in that and kind of dejected. And we see a lot of stuff with Wu and Maisie where he kind of is talking to her, and he gets some great development in his interactions where he's telling her all about her mother, essentially the one that she was cloned from. But yeah, even he survives. So I feel like if this had a death of a major cast member, the third act I think would have landed a bit better because it would have felt like there was more threat. And like I said, my main if I was to narrow it down to three, I think the options are Grant, Malcolm, or Owen, and I think Malcolm is the logical choice. As much as I love that character, he's the logical choice of the three. I also feel perhaps that maybe the movie might have been better received had it been re-edited during the pandemic to perhaps, instead of release it as a film, like during the pandemic, release it as a streaming series, like an event series, a mini series, using all the footage from the extended cut and break it up into maybe 3 hour long episodes, because the extended cut is about 3 hours long. And I think that would work in a better way to how it feels as a single film, because the majority of the extensions add a lot of quite necessary character development and pacing, especially to the early part of the film. There's character moments for Maisie, Owen, Claire, sort of identifying their relationship and where they've all ended up. They're keeping Maisie hidden while acting as like her surrogate parents. There's also more scenes of Ellie and Alan kind of laying a lot of the groundwork for their emotional climaxes in their story later on. Bits with Ellie's investigation, and all of that stuff to me really, really works and really helps the pacing of that first half of the movie. And so I think having that as an event series would work a lot better, because you'd have those moments spaced out in a way, and it would mean that you watch episode one with all that stuff, and it's like, okay, it's episode one. There's not as much dinosaur stuff, but there's things going. You've seen a lot of the wondrous dinosaur stuff in part one. Then part two, you get all of the stuff in Malta. You get some of the more action heavy stuff, and plots are starting to converge. And then Act Three, everything at the Biosyn place. That would be cool. We also get a fully feathered dinosaur in this one with the Pyroraptor, which looks incredible. Like it looks amazing. So yeah, there is that. Yeah, I do enjoy the film. I think it's good, and I find that the scope of it is very different. But this feels a lot more like a science thriller, like with the ecological disaster with the locusts and things like that. And in that respect, it does feel a lot more similar to the original film, in my opinion, than any of the previous sequels have. And I'm including in that The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3. It feels like there's a lot more echoes to that original film. Like, as much as there is reduced tension in some aspects, like the idea of science gone too far and the unintended consequences of it. Like those locusts were released to attack non-biosyn crops, which they do, but then it means that the biosyn and gene engineered crops aren't eaten. But as a result, those locusts have replicated and they're destroying so much. Like I said, it's going to lead to a famine, and it was obviously being done by Biosyn to make more money, because capitalism bad. But that feels like the unintentional science. We did this because we could, but we didn't stop to think if we should, or what the unintended consequences might be. And that's such a key theme of the series. I will say there's some other great stuff in this. Like, this is the third film released after COVID to reach $1 billion at the box office. Followed No Way Home and Spider-Man No Way Home and Top Gun Maverick, who both did the same thing. Trevorrow decided to return for this one. He said he wanted to finish what he started, and that decision came after he was removed from Rise of Skywalker, which he was originally going to direct, which would have left him unavailable to this. And he came back for this because Spielberg actually asked him to come back and direct it. This is also a film that in some ways was probably helped by being filmed during COVID, because suspending the filming during the pandemic allowed the cast to quarantine with the filmmakers when the production resumed, and it meant they were all in the same hotel together. They were all quarantining together, which means they were allowed to share atmosphere and environment. So, as a result, they were able to all share ideas with each other. And as a result, this was one of the first films that resumed production during the pandemic, and it helped to form the blueprint that then got used throughout the industry of how to do that, like how to maintain that pandemic safety while still filming this massive film with a lot of elements. Maybe that's why there's a lack of extras. Maybe that's why everything is so focused on the main cast. There's no other extras to get nommed because it was done through the pandemic. But it is what it is. There are some restrictions and schedule changes as a result of the pandemic that impacted negatively. For example, Jake Johnson was supposed to return as Lowry, was unable to. Danielle Pineda, I think it is, who played Zia. She was supposed to return for a second scene as the character, but was unable to. She only has one scene in the final movie, which is her scene earlier on with Franklin. Dilophosaurus, like I said, does get to reappear for the first time since the first film. That was a dinosaur that was a bit of a fan favourite. People had been asking for it to return for a long time. Just like in the first film, it's also redone completely with practical effects, no CGI. The pandemic delays also allowed Trevorrow to work on the VFX and sound mixing and the scores as separate processes while the filming was suspended. Which is something very unlike most film production. I spoke about this when I discussed the production for the Lord of the Rings movies. Everything in the film is kind of all done at the same time. But with this, Trevorrow could kind of oversee each bit separately because he wasn't still filming or he wasn't doing the score while also trying to work on the visual effects. He could a lot of the visual effects and score and sound mixing, a lot of that could continue during the pandemic because it could be done remotely. And so he was able to oversee that remotely. So it works really well for him. And the shorter cut for this film, obviously I said I watched the extended cut and I think the extended cut's great. The shorter cut was actually due to Universal getting nervous because of the pandemic. Like I said in previous episodes, when I was talking about the pandemic and the effect it had on films at this time, the studios needed hits. They needed things to come and make money. And, the reviews, despite the box office, this did pretty well at the box office. The reviews were generally unfavourable for the theatrical edition. But the extended cut does seem to have been more positively received. So either way, we're still getting a sequel. So we've got that to look forward to. But yeah, I think if you've only seen Dominion in the cinema and you didn't think much of it, try the extended version. I do think it's a vast improvement. Depending on what you disliked about the original. If some of the if some of the bits that you disliked are some of the things that I've mentioned I still dislike in this version, like the fact that the main characters never seem as at risk in the third act, then you're probably not going to be overly satisfied with this. But I do think a lot of the elements work a lot better, especially towards the first half of the film, to really establish the characters, establish all these disparate journeys that they're all on before everything comes together in that third act. So yeah, give it a look. You might prefer it. So what's next for Jurassic Park? As I said, we are getting a new film, a new sequel. It was announced in 2024, early 2024. That like this movie, this episode of the podcast is taking me that long to make. Like it got announced when I was first working on this podcast as an idea. And now we're heading to the point where we've got screenshots and we'll probably be getting a trailer for this soon because it's due out in 2025, but never mind. So it was announced to be in development by Universal Pictures. David Coop, who worked on both Jurassic Park and The Lost World, is returning to write the screenplay. Colin Trevorrow is not returning. It's still being overseen by Steven Spielberg, Frank Marshall, Patrick Crowley, the same producers who have worked on the past few films for a while now. Development has actually been underway for some time. There's been several drafts written by Co-op. The producers have also done a lot of pre-production work, including dinosaur designs, meaning that the creative input from the director would be minimal. Like, this position has been described as more shooter than auteur, and people are speculating this is so that the producers get a lot more of a creative control over the final product than Dominion, because obviously Dominion ended up with quite negative reviews. Now, that can be a bad thing because, like I said, with Dominion, I think it was the extended cut seems to have been much better received than the theatrical cut. So, if anything, it seems to be the reduction to the length in order to make that theatrical cut that seemed to have hurt, got them more negative reviews than anything else. Things that have been said about it. Spielberg and Co-op apparently both wanted to turn the series to the tone of the original Jurassic Park trilogy, especially the first film. Co-op apparently had no story requirements to follow, aside from obviously the fact there's got to be dinosaurs in it. So he did come up with a list of rules for himself, however, one among those being that it should be based on accurate science, but also that it should not retcon any of the events from the previous films. So all 6 of those previous films are still canon. Now, David Leitch was briefly in talks to direct the film during early 2024, but negotiations broke down. It was eventually announced that Gareth Edwards would direct it. I've spoken about Gareth Edwards' work before. I was a big fan of his Godzilla. I was a big fan of The Creator. So, and he is a fan of the original Jurassic Park. But yeah, he said he was planning to take a break from studio filmmaking, but then he got offered Jurassic World, which he said is the only movie that would make me drop everything like a stone and dive right in, which is apparently what he did. So fair enough. I can't false him. I can't fault him. Can't fault him for that. I think that's a great idea. The movie itself, the plot synopsis we have so far, says that 5 years after the events of Jurassic World Dominion, the planet's environment has shown itself to be mainly inhospitable to dinosaurs. The ones that are left will live in remote equatorial regions with conditions similar to those in which they were formerly abundant. So whether that's suggesting that a lot of the previous dinosaurs have died out, I don't know. We did see some of the Site B dinosaurs towards the end of the last film. Like, there's a scene where we see Rexy with a T-Rex couple, and that T-Rex couple are the Buck and the Doe from Jurassic Park: The Lost World. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, Zora Bennett, played by Scarlett Johansson, is a skilled expert in clandestine operations. She is hired to work with paleontologist Dr. Henry Loomis, played by Jonathan Bailey, and team leader Duncan Kincaid, played by Mahershala Ali, on a top secret mission to obtain genetic material from the 3 largest creatures in the world's tropical biosphere. This genetic material will contain the key to a drug that will miraculously save human lives. Zora's operation, however, crosses paths with a civilian family whose boating adventure was overturned by roving aquatic dinosaurs, leaving them all stranded on an island where they must confront a terrifying, ominous revelation that has been kept secret from the world for decades. So that is an interesting idea, and I think the cast is great. Scarlett Johansson and Mahershala Ali, 2 actors I quite like. Scarlett Johansson apparently described this as something she's been wanting to do for a while. I don't know if she has auditioned for any of the Jurassic World movies. I know she was probably not, because she would have been quite busy with the MCU at the time, but then so was Chris Pratt. So, he managed to make it work. Jonathan Bailey is an actor I'm not familiar with. I know he's in Bridgerton, but I've not seen Bridgerton. I also know that he's going to be playing Fiyero in Wicked, which I am planning to see. So hopefully, I'm sure he's great in that. Like, everything I've seen from Wicked looks incredible. So I don't know anything about him, but yeah, I'm sure he'll be fine. I'm
quite interested about the film. There's also the sequel series of Camp Cretaceous, which is out at the minute, called Chaos Theory, which is set pre-Dominion. Um, I'm glad the new film isn't a complete reboot. I'm glad that it is keeping that current continuity, especially because it is following so soon after the previous ones. Like, personally, I think maybe the franchise should probably take a bit more time away, but I do see why Universal want to keep the brand fresh. Like, Jurassic Park and Jurassic World is one of their most popular brands. Like, I can see really why they are trying to keep it going. But I think this is also a series that has, over the years, been plagued with development problems. Now, fortunately, the Jurassic World movies, with the exception of the pandemic, don't seem to have been really affected by this. So hopefully that streak continues for Jurassic World Rebirth. And, by all accounts, it's been a pretty smooth production so far. Like I said, we're probably going to be expecting a trailer towards the early half of 2025. It's by the time I'm recording this now, this is late December 2024. So we're probably not very far from a trailer and seeing more of it. The screenshots we've seen look good. We haven't seen any dinosaur stuff, but we've seen a lot of human stuff and humans looking at big things and looking scared and looking wondrous. So standard Jurassic Park stuff. So yeah, I'm down for it. And like I said, with Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory, um, working as two kind of bookended series, they're kind of doing a similar sort of thing for Jurassic World as series like Clone Wars and The Bad Batch have done for Star Wars. Sort of expanding on it with for a younger audience, not necessarily kids, but it's an all ages tone, but definitely geared towards that younger audience. Um, so yeah, that seems to be working well for them as well. So yeah, by all accounts, Jurassic Park is doing quite well. So it's probably the most successful it's been for a very, very long time. Jurassic World was probably the shot in the arm this series needed to transition it. But that original film as well, like, it got re-released recently for the 30th anniversary, made a ton more money. Even with the fact it's this 30-year-old film that's been widely available for years. And I don't think they even remastered it or anything. I don't think they gave it an HD transfer. I don't think, it's not like they went in and redid all the special effects or anything. It was pretty much just a straight re-release because it looks that good already. Brilliant. And it's still making tons of money again because if you've grown up since that movie, you've never seen it on cinema. And I've spoken before about like cinema snobbery. Like, a lot of film directors say, "Oh, you have to watch it in the cinema. It's the best way to watch the movie." But then, obviously, most films only release in the cinema for 6 weeks to 3 months, if you're lucky. And most people who will experience that film throughout their lives are going to watch it at home. They're not going to watch it in cinemas. So, on the part of a lot of auteur directors, especially, there is a bit of a cinema snobbery. But at the same time, I do recognise there is something very, very cool about watching a film that you've excited for, especially if it is a film that you've seen and is something effects heavy like Jurassic Park, and going back and watching it in the cinema and getting that experience on a different level. It is a different experience. I'm not gonna lie, it is. I've spoken about this before. I went back with Zulu. We went and watched Aliens in the cinema, and it was very, very cool. The only issue is we've been used to watching the extended cut, so we were like, "Well, where's that scene? I thought that was in the main movie." No, but yeah, I'm excited for the new film. There's also a new survival game coming out, set in the immediate aftermath of the first film, called Jurassic Park Survivor. So yeah, there's good new stuff going on. So hopefully, this new film, might lead to some new sequels. And I might be wrong. I'd be very happy to be wrong. with the idea that it's too soon to do this. I'd be so happy if I was wrong, because at the end of the day, all I want is good movies, and I don't think any of these movies are bad. I don't think any of the Jurassic Park films are bad. They all give you exactly what you want. They give you dinosaurs versus humans, and people get et. There's carnage, there's blood, there's gore, there's horror, but some of them are still better than others. Some of them do so many things better than others. But there's way more hits in this series than there have ever been misses. And even the misses, it's not a film on its own. Like, the worst film in this series, which is probably Fallen Kingdom. If I was to rank them, I think Fallen Kingdom would come up worse. That, as the worst film in this series, it still has a lot of good stuff in it, as I've said. Same with Lost Worlds, same with Jurassic Park 3, same with Dominion, and the two that are generally considered to be good, if not great, which are Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. Jurassic World, good. Jurassic Park, great. They are fantastic. And if Rebirth is able to capture anything like that, it should do really well. And this franchise will probably be here, making people obsessed with dinosaurs for a very long time. And that's not a bad thing. Dinosaurs are cool. So, thank you for joining me for this episode. Like I've said, this episode has been in production for a long time, and there's been multiple reasons why it has taken this long. And so obviously parts of this episode were recorded at very different times. Like, some bits were released back when I was working on it. Some bits were recorded back when I was working on it during the Writers Guild of America strike, when I was still hoping to kind of release it in 2023. Some bits were recorded earlier in 2024, and like I said, the most recent bits have been recorded right now in late December. But there's a reason why I still wanted to finish this episode, and it's because these are good films and I'll enjoy talking about them. And I do want to come back to this franchise. I do want to discuss the book. I'll probably go and look at Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory at some point as well. So having that basis for those 6 movies, I think, was necessary, especially because, like I said, I've got things to say about them. I do think there's a lot of merit in these movies, good and bad. So this is one of the episodes that I had started working on in 2023 that became a priority for me to get finished. And I'm very glad I do have it finished now. It's taken a while. It's taken a lot longer than I expected. But it was always one that was in the forefront of my mind, like coming back to this episode and finishing it. So it's a bit of a labour of love in the end. And maybe I've not been as drawn to it as some of the others, which I've been frantically writing notes about. But yeah, this is definitely one that I wanted to get done as soon as possible. Hopefully you're listening to this not long after I've finished recording this, probably just after the holidays, so I hope you all had a great holiday. And there's a lot more to come in the future, not Jurassic Park, but a lot more episodes to come in the future, and I'm hoping to have the next few with you very, very, very soon. So thank you very much for listening. It's been wonderful having you all here again. It's been wonderful making content for everyone again. I've been recently, at a time of recording this, sharing a lot of my old episodes, and I am seeing my numbers go up, and it's amazing that so many of you are out there listening to me. So thank you so much for that. I'm not, I originally started this podcast just for me to talk about the things I wanted to talk about, and the fact that there are people out there not only listening but who also keep coming back and wanting to listen again. It's amazing, and I cannot thank you enough. All of you and your support and your attention, it means so much to me. I love you all, seriously, from the bottom of my heart. It's been incredible, and it's been amazing for me seeing all of that support. So thank you so much. Until next time, as always, you look after your physical and mental health as best you can. I'm not always the best at that myself, but I say it because I want us all to be happy and healthy, as best we can, so we can keep doing this for a long time, So take care of yourselves, guys, and I will be back next time. So until then, bye for now.
Thank you for joining us here at Garhdo Goes Geek. Your support of this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful to everyone who listens. If you wish to engage more with myself and my co-hosts, we have a few other ways to do this. Firstly, if you go to the link tree linked in the description, you'll find links not just to this podcast on every platform, but also to our Discord server, where you can interact directly with all of us, and a link to a dedicated subreddit for this podcast. There is also a link to a supporting Blogspot page, where I'll be posting supporting material for this podcast, including progress updates, schedules, and watch orders for the content I cover should you wish to watch along with me. I also have a link to a Spotify playlist featuring some of the music items I've discussed in the podcast. You can also add me on Facebook if you so wish, or follow on Twitch, where I'll be hosting a weekly stream. Finally, there is also a link in there to Ko-Fi, where you have the option to leave a one-time tip if you so wish, or alternatively to commission your own podcast episode. So if there is a topic you would like me to cover that I have yet to do so, then you can request I cover it for a small sponsorship fee. However, if you do not have the means to do so, then all I ask is that if you could please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone else you think may like it. I love you all. Until next time, bye for now.